Before we begin, allow yourself to settle comfortably. Wherever you are, let the room around you grow quiet and let the day slowly loosen its hold. There is nothing more you need to do now, nowhere else you need to be, and no thought that must be followed to its end. Take one slow breath in and let it go gently. Let your shoulders soften, your hands grow still, and your eyes become heavy in their own time. If your mind wanders, that is all right. You can simply return to the sound of this voice, moving softly through the silence. Tonight is for resting, for drifting, for letting the world become smaller, quieter, and kinder. So lie back and breathe slowly, and let sleep come when it is ready. Late in April of 1893, when the grass in the Yorkshire dales had begun to lift itself into a softer green, and the lambs were already learning the small, uncertain courage of their legs, Gabriel Thorne came back to Renwick after 25 years away. He arrived near the end of a pale afternoon, when the sky was neither clear nor clouded, but held in that quiet English greyness which seems to soften every roof, every wall, and every field into memory. The road from the little station wound upward between dry stone walls, past thorn hedges beginning to show their first white buds, past low barns with moss along their slate edges, past fields where sheep stood heavy with winter wool, their backs rounded and still beneath the slow-moving light. Here and there, a lamb called out from behind its mother, and the sound travelled strangely far in the damp spring air, as if the hills themselves were carrying it from one fold of land to another. Gabriel sat beside the carrier on the narrow cart, his travelling bag at his feet, and his right hand hidden deep inside the sleeve of his dark coat. The coat was too warm for the day, but he had chosen it because the cuffs were long. They covered what he did not wish to explain. For a long while, he said nothing. The carrier, a broad, patient man with a weather-darkened face, had tried once or twice to make conversation when they first left the station. He had asked whether Gabriel had family in Renwick, whether he remembered the road, whether Bradford had been as busy as people said. Gabriel had answered politely, but briefly, and after that, the man had let the silence rest between them. It was not an unfriendly silence. In that part of the country, people understood that a man returning after many years might have more to hear than to say. The wheels moved slowly over the rutted lane. Mud from the last rain clung to the edges of the road. The hedgerows smelled faintly of wet earth and new leaves. In the distance, beyond the uneven fields and the old grey walls, Renwick lay where it had always lain, tucked low beneath the hills, with its church tower, its cluster of stone cottages, its small inn, its smithy, and the narrow lane that led toward the shearing yards. Gabriel looked at it without moving. 25 years had passed since he had last seen the village from that road. He had been a younger man then, leaner, quicker in every movement, with a pair of hands that never seemed to tire, and a name that could be spoken in any shearing yard across the dales with a certain nod of respect. Men had said that Gabriel Thorne could take the fleece from a sheep as cleanly as peeling bark from a willow branch, with no wasted motion, no roughness, no panic in the animal beneath him. They had said his right hand knew the weight of the shears better than most men knew the weight of their own pocket watch. He had not believed all the praise, not even then, but he had lived inside it. He had carried it quietly, as a man carries a tool he uses every day, without thinking much of it until it is gone. Now, his right hand lay hidden in his sleeve, stiff and weak, the fingers curled slightly, as if remembering a shape they could no longer hold. At Bradford, in the woolen mill, the machinery had caught him before anyone could stop it. The doctors had saved the hand. They had said that more than once, as though saving it were the same as restoring it. They had kept the skin closed, set what could be set, dressed what could be dressed, but they could not give back the old certainty, the swift grip, the clean command between wrist and finger. They could not return the hand that had made Gabriel Thorne himself, so he had come back to Renwick, not in triumph, not with money enough to buy land, not with stories of success. He had come back because there was nowhere else that still knew the shape of him before the accident, and because his sister Winifred had written in her careful hand that the old room was empty, the roof still sound, and no questions would be asked until he wished to answer them. The cart turned down the lane toward her farm. Winifred Thorne's place stood a little apart from the village, beyond a shallow rise where the land dipped toward a beck. It was not a grand farm, nor a poor one. The house was built of the same weathered stone as the walls around it, with a low roof, a square chimney, and a kitchen window that looked out over a small yard. Behind it stood the byre, the hay shed, and the long, unused shearing shed, where Gabriel had first learned to hold a sheep between his knees when he was no taller than the gate latch. Smoke lifted from the chimney. At the sight of it, something in Gabriel's chest tightened, not painfully, but with an ache too old to be new and too sudden to be called memory. Winifred was waiting at the door. She had grown smaller, or perhaps the years had made her seem finer, more closely drawn around the bones of the girl he had left behind. Her hair, once brown like his, was almost entirely silver now, pinned firmly at the back of her head. She wore a dark wool dress, a clean apron, and the expression of someone who had already decided that pity would not be useful. When the cart stopped, she came down the step. "Gabriel," she said. That was all. He climbed down slowly, taking care with his bag, taking care with his coat sleeve, taking care with himself, as though he were something fragile and not quite familiar. Winifred saw the movement. He knew she saw it, but she did not look at his hand. She looked only at his face. "You'll be wanting tea," she said. The carrier lowered the bag. Winifred paid him before Gabriel could reach awkwardly for his purse, and when he began to protest, she gave him one calm glance that ended the matter. Then she took the lighter parcel herself and led him inside. The kitchen was warm, not brightly lit, not overly cheerful, but warm in the deep, steady way of a room that had held many evenings and expected many more. A fire burned low in the black grate. A kettle rested near the hob. There was a loaf beneath a cloth, a small dish of butter, a wedge of crumbly cheese, and a brown teapot already waiting on the table. The flagstone floor had been scrubbed. The old settle stood against the wall. Above it hung the same clock Gabriel remembered from childhood, ticking with a patient wooden sound. For a moment, he could not speak. Winifred moved around the kitchen with deliberate quietness, setting down cups, cutting bread, placing a chair where the fire would warm him without making him feel watched. She did not ask how the journey had been. She did not ask whether the hand pained him She did not ask why he had waited so long to come home. That was her kindness. Gabriel sat at the table and held the cup with his left hand. The tea was strong and plain, the way their mother had made it. Outside, a sheep called once from the field behind the house, and the sound came through the thick wall like something remembered in sleep. "You'll have the old room," Winifred said after a while. "I aired it yesterday." Gabriel nodded. "Thank you. There's hot water in the jug. Supper will be simple. Simple is enough." She cut another slice of bread and set it near his plate. "You needn't decide anything tonight," she said. He looked up then, and for the first time since entering the house, he met her eyes properly. Winifred's face had not softened exactly. She was not a woman given to soft expressions, but there was steadiness in it, and the steadiness was more comforting than sympathy would have been. "No," Gabriel said quietly, "not tonight." After supper, she showed him upstairs. The room was small, with a sloping ceiling and one window looking out toward the fields. A narrow bed stood against the wall, covered with a faded quilt. There was a washstand, a chair, a small chest, and a peg for his coat. Nothing had been made too fine for him. Nothing had been arranged as though he were a guest of importance. It was simply ready. When Winifred left him, Gabriel stood for a long time in the middle of the room. He took off his coat slowly. The right sleeve resisted, as it always did, catching against the curled fingers. He eased the fabric loose with his left hand, jaw tightening, breath held until the task was done. Then he placed the coat over the chair and looked down at the hand he had kept hidden all afternoon. In the dim light, it looked less like an injury than a question. The fingers were there. The thumb was there. The shape of a hand remained, but the old strength was gone from it. The hand no longer opened fully. It no longer closed around an object with trust. It trembled after small efforts. On damp days, a dull pain gathered in the joints and spread toward the wrist, as if the machinery at Bradford had left some echo inside the bone. Gabriel turned away from it. He washed, changed, and sat on the edge of the bed without undressing further. The house settled around him. Below, he heard Winifred moving once across the kitchen, banking the fire, drawing the bolt. The clock downstairs counted the minutes with the same slow confidence it must have had when he was a boy. Then, after the house grew still, the sounds outside became clearer. The wind moved gently along the wall. Somewhere in the yard, a loose chain tapped once against wood. From the higher pasture came the low, restless murmur of sheep. Not loud, not near, only present. Gabriel closed his eyes. At once, the sound carried him backward. He saw the shearing shed, as it had been in June light, doors open at both ends, dust turning gold in the air, men in shirt sleeves bent over their work, fleeces falling clean and whole, boys running with twine, women bringing bread and tea, the quick metallic opening and closing of shears. He smelled lanolin, sweat, straw, warm wool, and the faint green scent of trampled grass. He felt the strength in his knees, the sure balance in his back, the animal weight held steady, the right hand moving without thought. There had been pride in it, yes, but there had also been peace. A good shearer did not fight the sheep. He listened to it through his hands. He knew when to press and when to loosen, when to turn the body, when to wait half a breath before the next cut. Speed had come later. Cleanliness came first. Stillness came first. Trust came first. Gabriel opened his eyes. The room had darkened. The last grey of evening lay in the window. His right hand rested on his knee, useless and familiar, stranger and companion both. He had thought, when the accident happened, that the worst pain was in the crushing itself, in the weeks of dressings, in the first failed attempt to button his shirt, in the look on the doctor's face when he spoke too gently. But now, sitting in the old room at Renwick, listening to sheep on the hills, Gabriel understood that the deeper pain had come afterwards. It was not only that he could no longer hold the shears, it was that he no longer knew who he was without them. For 25 years, even in Bradford, where the mill swallowed men into noise and steam and long hours, he had still been Gabriel Thorne of Renwick, the shearer with the quick right hand. That truth had lived beneath everything else, beneath wages, beneath soot, beneath rented rooms and factory bells, beneath the years of being away. Now even that had loosened. Outside, a lamb called again, smaller this time, and was answered by its mother. Gabriel listened until the sound faded into the dark. He lay down at last, though sleep did not come quickly. The bed was narrow, the quilt heavy, the pillow smelling faintly of lavender and clean linen. From the fields came the quiet life of the animals, breathing beneath the night. From below came the last faint warmth of the kitchen fire. And around the old stone house, the spring wind moved over Renwick, as it had moved before he left, as it had moved while he was gone, as it would move after every man's name had been spoken for the last time. Gabriel turned onto his side and drew his injured hand close against his chest. He did not pray. He did not make any promise to remain. He did not yet believe that the village could hold him without reminding him of all he had lost. But he stayed through the night, and outside, beyond the darkened window, the sheep waited in their fields, heavy with wool, beneath the soft and patient hills. The first days in Renwick passed slowly, as though the village itself did not quite know how to receive him. Morning came with a thin brightness over the fields, pale and cool, touching the tops of the dry stone walls before it reached the yard below Winifred's kitchen window. The grass was wet each dawn. The sheep stood in the lower pastures with their wool darkened by mist, and the lambs moved beside them in small, uncertain jumps, as if the world had been made only that morning and still needed testing. From the byre came the soft shifting of hooves, from the hedges the faint stir of birds, and from the kitchen chimney a narrow thread of smoke rose straight into the early air before the breeze took it sideways over the roof. Gabriel woke early, though there was no bell, no mill whistle, no machinery waiting to swallow the day. For many years in Bradford, his body had learned to rise before it wished to, dragged upward by habit and duty. In Renwick, the silence was deeper, and because it was deeper, it seemed to hold more sound. He heard the clock below, the low call of a cow in a neighboring field, Winifred moving about the kitchen with the careful economy of a woman who had lived alone long enough to waste neither motion nor coal. He dressed slowly. The right hand was always worst in the morning. It had stiffened in the night, the fingers drawn inward, the joints unwilling. Gabriel sat on the edge of the bed and worked at them with his left hand, gently at first, then with a little more pressure, until a dull ache moved up into his wrist. He did not look long at the hand. He had learned the shape of it by now, and there was no comfort in studying what could not be changed. He pulled his cuff down over it, fastened what buttons he could with his left hand, and went downstairs. Winifred had porridge on the table, with a small jug of milk and a piece of yesterday's bread toasted near the fire. "You slept?" she asked. "A little. That is enough for a first night." She said it as if sleep were a practical matter, like kindling or flour, something that might be gathered in small amounts until there was enough to go on with. Gabriel took his place at the table. He held the spoon in his left hand. It still felt like a borrowed skill, clumsy but serviceable. Winifred noticed, of course. Winifred noticed everything, but she only poured tea and set the cup where he could reach it easily. After breakfast, he asked whether there was work he might do. She looked at him across the table, not sharply, not tenderly, but with a kind of quiet measurement. "There is always work," she said. So he began with small things. He carried kindling from the shed, one armful at a time, though it took longer than it should have. He swept the kitchen step. He fed the hens, scattering grain awkwardly from his left hand, while the birds gathered and pecked at his boots with bright, thoughtless impatience. He helped Winifred move a sack of oats, pushing more with his shoulder than lifting. He fetched water from the pump, slowly, the handle cold beneath his palm, the bucket knocking against his leg as he crossed the yard. None of it was difficult work. That was the trouble with it. Each task was useful enough that he could not refuse it, and small enough that it reminded him of what had become small in himself. Once he had worked long days in the shearing yards until his shirt clung damp to his back and the fleeces lay in great pale heaps behind him. Once men had watched his hands to learn the neatness of a cut. Now he was careful not to spill grain. Still, Winifred thanked him for each thing as if it had weight. By the third morning, he had learned the safe paths around the farm, and the unsafe ones too. The kitchen, the woodpile, the pump, the hen run, the lower gate, the narrow strip of garden, where Winifred had onions pushing through the earth. These places he could pass through easily enough, but beyond the yard, past the cart shed and the low wall, where nettles grew in a broken line, stood the old shearing shed. He did not go near it. It was a long building of grey stone and weathered timber, with wide doors that could be opened at both ends when the work was in full swing. One door sagged slightly now. The iron latch had darkened. Moss clung to the lower stones where rainwater gathered, and the small window high in the wall had gone dull with dust. Nothing about it called attention to itself. It simply stood there, patient and familiar, holding inside it a younger version of Gabriel that he was not ready to meet. Each time his path might have taken him past it, he found another way. Winifred said nothing. The village, however, had begun to speak, not loudly. Renwick was not a place where news burst open all at once. It passed from person to person in the old ways, over a garden wall, beside the churchyard gate, at the counter of the grocer's shop, in the pause before a horse was led from the smithy, in the low-voiced exchange of women buying flour and men waiting for nails or lamp oil. Gabriel Thorne had come back. Gabriel Thorne of the quick shears. Gabriel Thorne who had gone to Bradford. Gabriel Thorne whose hand had been injured in a mill. By the end of the week, everyone knew. The older people remembered him with a warmth that did not always know how to show itself kindly. Mrs. Arkwright, who kept the little shop near the church, peered at him over the counter when he came to buy tobacco for Winifred's old neighbour, and said she would have known him anywhere, though in truth she looked first at his brow, then at his shoulders, then at the hidden hand. "You were always your mother's son," she said. "Same eyes." Gabriel thanked her. "And quick," she added. "My father used to say there was no man in 3 parishes could clear a fleece cleaner than you." Gabriel placed the coins on the counter with his left hand. "That was a long while ago." "Aye," she said, softer then. "Still, folk remember. That was meant as a kindness." It followed him out into the street like a weight. Near the smithy, old Matthew Rigg called to him from a bench, where he sat with one boot stretched toward the sun. "Thorn," he said, "is it truly you?" Gabriel stopped, because there was no polite way not to. Matthew had been old, even when Gabriel was young, or so it seemed now. His face had folded into deeper lines, and his hands rested on his stick as if they had earned the right to be still. "I heard you were back," Matthew said. "Well, well, I saw you shear at Kemp's yard in '71. Do you remember? Rain coming by noon, and Silas's father fretting over the south flock. You took them one after another, like turning pages in a book." Gabriel did remember. He remembered the heat inside the shed, the smell of wool rising thickly, the urgency of weather in every man's movement, the way the sheep had come to him heavy and left him light. He remembered young Silas Kemp standing nearby then, broad-shouldered already, watching with a seriousness that wanted to become authority. "I remember rain," Gabriel said. Matthew laughed gently. "There was rain, right enough, but you beat it." Gabriel gave a small nod and moved on before the old man could say more. The young people were different. They knew him only through these fragments passed down by fathers and uncles, by men who had stood in shearing sheds before their sons were born. To them, Gabriel was not quite a man and not quite a story. They glanced at him with curiosity when he passed the inn or crossed the green near the church. A few touched their caps. Some whispered after he had gone by. Not cruelly, perhaps, but whispers do not need cruelty to sting. He saw one boy mimic the closing motion of shears with 2 fingers, quick and bright in the air, then stop when another boy nudged him. Gabriel walked on. Everywhere, the village was preparing for shearing. It was in the small things first. Twine appeared in coils beside doors. Sacking was beaten and mended. The carpenter planed a new board for one of the shearing tables. At Kemp's, down the lane beyond the inn, men were seen moving hurdles and setting the holding pens in order. Women began speaking of pies, loaves, boiled puddings, tea strong enough for a long day's labor. Children were sent with messages between farms, pleased to be useful and important for an errand's length. In the fields, the sheep carried their fleeces like weather. Their wool had grown heavy through winter, thick along the back and sides, catching bits of straw, thorn, and dried grass. When they moved, the fleece shifted as a single burden. When they stood still, they looked carved from soft grey stone. Gabriel could not pass a flock without seeing the work waiting there, the line of the spine, the turn of the shoulder, the place where a careful hand would begin, the way the animal must be held so that it yielded without fear. His body remembered before his mind allowed it. Sometimes, standing at Winifred's lower gate, he would find his left hand opening and closing at his side, not from pain, but from memory. His right hand, hidden in the sleeve, remained still. No one asked him to join. At first, He told himself this was tact. People were being kind. They knew of the accident, and they did not wish to shame him with an invitation he could not accept. It was better, perhaps, that no one spoke of it. Better to let the matter rest. But as the days passed, the silence changed its shape. It was no longer merely kindness. It became a boundary. The village remembered him, yes, but it remembered him as one remembers a tool that had once been excellent and was now kept in a drawer because no one quite knows what else to do with it. Men spoke to him of former years. They told him what he had been. They did not ask what he might do now. That hurt more than refusal. A refusal, at least, would have been a door one could see. This was only air where a door should have been. One afternoon, when the sky had lowered and the lanes smelled of coming rain, Gabriel walked into the village because Winifred needed lamp oil and salt. He had begun to take such errands upon himself, partly to be useful and partly because remaining too long in the house made his thoughts grow close and stale. He went down the lane with his collar turned up, past the churchyard where the grass had been newly cut around the stones, past the schoolhouse with its windows bright in the grey day, and into the small shop. After buying what was needed, he did not go home at once. The inn stood a little beyond the green, with smoke in its chimney and 2 carts drawn up near the wall. The sign above the door creaked faintly in the damp breeze. Gabriel had not meant to enter. He had only paused, looking at the road beyond it, where the hills rose in folds. But then the rain began, lightly at first, speckling the dust and darkening the stones, and he stepped inside. The room was low-ceilinged and warm. A fire burned with more smoke than flame. The air held the smell of ale, wet wool coats, tobacco, and old wood. 3 men sat near the hearth, speaking of weather. Another stood at the bar. Their voices quieted when Gabriel entered, not fully, not rudely, but enough for him to feel the change. The innkeeper nodded. "Afternoon, Mr. Thorne. Afternoon." Gabriel ordered a half pint and took a place at a small table near the window, where he could see the rain running down the glass in thin lines. He kept his right arm close to his side. The ale was dark and mild. He drank slowly. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then the door opened again, bringing in a gust of damp air and the broad figure of Silas Kemp. Gabriel knew him at once, though Silas had thickened with age and authority. He was a large man, not careless in his strength, but used to having his words obeyed quickly. His beard had begun to grey at the edges. His boots were muddy, his coat dark with rain at the shoulders, and his eyes moved around the room with the habit of a farmer measuring weather, men, and time in a single glance. When he saw Gabriel, he stopped. Not long, only enough. "Thorne," he said. "Silas." The use of the Christian name seemed to belong to another life, but neither man corrected it. Silas came over with his mug after speaking to the innkeeper. He did not ask permission before sitting, which might once have felt rude, but now seemed merely like the manner of a man whose days were too full for unnecessary ceremony. "I heard you were back," he said. "So I gather." Silas looked at him directly. "Bradford, was it?" "Yes. Bad business, Mills." Gabriel gave a small movement that might have been agreement. For a little while, they spoke of ordinary things, the late spring, the lambing, the price of wool, which Silas said was not what it ought to be, the roads after rain, Winifred's farm, which Silas said she had kept better than many men could have done. Gabriel answered as well as he could, grateful for the plainness of the subjects, and tired by them at the same time. Then, as such conversations do, it found the place both men had been avoiding. "Shearing starts soon," Silas said, looking into his mug. "I had seen preparations. Aye, more sheep this year. Took on the upper pasture from Bell's widow. Good grass, but it adds work." Gabriel watched the rain on the window. Silas cleared his throat. "There'll be a long week of it, if the weather does not hold." Yes, another pause came. It was not a cruel pause. That almost made it worse. Silas shifted on the bench. "I heard," he said, "that you cannot shear now." The words were not loud. No one across the room seemed to stop speaking because of them. Yet Gabriel felt them land with the clean heaviness of a stone set on a table. He looked down at his left hand around the mug. "No," he said after a moment. "Not as I did." Silas nodded, practical, almost relieved to have the thing named. "That is what I was told." Gabriel waited. Silas did not mean to wound him. Gabriel could see that. He was not a spiteful man. He was thinking of work, weather, numbers, animals, men, hours of daylight. To Silas, shearing was not a memory or a measure of a man's soul. It was a season that had to be managed before rain came, and the sheep suffered, and the fleeces spoiled. Still, his next words cut more deeply, because they were spoken without malice. "It is hard work for sound hands," Silas said. "Harder every year, it seems. We need men who can keep pace." Gabriel heard the fire settle in the grate. He heard someone laugh quietly at the bar. He heard rain ticking against the window. "I know what the work is," he said. Silas looked up then, perhaps hearing something in his tone. "Aye," he said, "of course you do. I meant no offense." No, but offense had come all the same, not because Silas had intended it, but because the truth had been waiting for a voice, and now it had one. They sat a little longer, though the conversation had ended. Silas finished his drink first. Before he rose, he placed a hand briefly on the table. "It is good you came home," he said, and there was an awkward kindness in it. "Winifred will be glad of you." Gabriel nodded. "Yes," he said, "perhaps." Silas left soon after, stepping back into the rain with his collar raised and his mind already returned, Gabriel imagined, to hurdles, men, sheep, and weather. Gabriel remained at the table. The inn seemed warmer than before, but he felt cold beneath his coat. The rain blurred the village outside until the stone cottages looked like shapes seen through old glass. He thought of the shearing shed at Winifred's farm. He thought of the years in Bradford, endured because somewhere beneath them lived the old certainty that he had once been good at something clean and skilled and necessary. He thought of the men at Kemp's Yard, bending over their work, while he stood outside, like a ghost who had arrived too early for his own remembrance. "Not as I did," that was what he had said, but the village had heard something simpler. Not any more. When he rose at last, the room had grown quiet again, or perhaps he had stopped listening. He paid for the ale, gathered Winifred's parcel from beside the bench, and stepped out into the rain. The lane home was wet and shining. Water gathered in the ruts. The hedges leaned darkly over the stone walls. In the fields, the sheep stood with their heads lowered, patient beneath the weather, carrying the wool that other hands would soon remove. Gabriel walked slowly. By the time he reached Winifred's gate, he had almost made up his mind. He would stay a few more days, because leaving at once would trouble his sister and stir questions in the village. But before the shearing began, before the yards filled with men and sound and the work that had once belonged to him, he would take his bag and go, perhaps to Leeds, perhaps farther, somewhere large enough that a man with a ruined hand could disappear into other men's misfortunes and not be remembered incorrectly. Winifred was in the kitchen when he entered, mending a tear in a flour sack by the fire. She looked up, saw his wet coat, and then his face. "Rain caught you," she said. "Yes." He set the salt and lamp oil on the table. She waited. Gabriel removed his hat and stood with it in his left hand. The sleeve of his right arm hung low, darkened by rain at the cuff. "I saw Silas Kemp," he said. Winifred drew the needle through the cloth. "I thought you might. He says they need sound hands." The needle paused for only a moment. Then it moved again. "That sounds like Silas." Gabriel gave a small, tired laugh without amusement. "It also sounds like the truth." Winifred tied off the thread, cut it with her small scissors, and folded the sack once over her knee. "Truth is not always the whole of a thing," she said. Gabriel looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, evening was beginning to gather, softening the yard, the pump, the cart shed, the dark shape of the shearing shed beyond. He did not answer. That night, after supper, he went upstairs early. He did not undress at once. He sat beside the window and listened to the rain passing over the roof, steady and fine, like fingers brushing wool. From somewhere out in the fields came the low sound of sheep settling for the night. The village remembered him. That was the trouble. It remembered the quickness, the clean fleece, the young man with the right hand that never faltered. It remembered so clearly that there seemed no room left for the man who had returned. Gabriel had feared being forgotten, but now he wondered whether being remembered wrongly was lonelier still. He lifted his injured hand from beneath the sleeve and laid it in his lap. In the dimness, the fingers looked pale and tired. He tried, very slowly, to open them. They moved a little, not enough. Outside, the rain went on falling over Renwick, over the stone walls, over the sheep in their fields, over the old shearing shed, where the tools of another life waited in the dark. By morning, the rain had passed, leaving Renwick rinsed and quiet beneath a pale spring sky. The yard behind Winifred's house shone in small places where water had gathered between the stones. Drops clung to the lower branches of the thorn hedge. The pump handle was wet and cold, the wooden gate swollen slightly from the night's damp, and beyond the wall, the fields rose in soft green folds toward the hills. The sheep stood scattered there in the clean light, their heavy fleeces silvered at the edges, their heads lowered to the grass, as if nothing in the world had changed except the weather. Gabriel came downstairs later than usual. Winifred was already at the table, mending a leather strap with an awl and a length of dark cord. The fire had been lit, but not built high. A kettle steamed softly near the hob. On the table lay a small heap of farm things that needed attention. A torn halter, 2 lengths of frayed twine, a wooden peg split near the head, and a pair of dull shears wrapped in sacking. Gabriel saw the shears before he saw anything else. They were not the old shears from his youth, not the fine pair he had once carried from yard to yard, sharpened and oiled and guarded with the care a man gives to the thing by which he earns both bread and name. These were ordinary farm shears, used for rough trimming, stiff at the hinge and darkened with age, yet the shape of them was enough. The long blades, the curved handles, the memory of pressure and release. He stopped near the bottom of the stairs. Winifred did not look up at once. "There's tea," she said. Gabriel remained where he was. "You have work laid out. There is work to be done." He came to the table slowly and sat down, keeping his injured hand beneath the edge of his sleeve. The shears lay within reach of him, but he did not touch them. He poured tea with his left hand, and the cup rattled once against the saucer. Winifred set the awl down. "I know what you are thinking," she said. Gabriel looked toward the window. "I doubt it. You are thinking of leaving before the shearing begins." He said nothing. Outside, a hen crossed the yard with the solemn importance of a churchwarden. Winifred folded the leather strap in her lap and smoothed it once with her thumb. "You may go, if you choose. I will not bar the door, and I will not ask the carrier to forget the road, but I would have you stay until spring is properly done." Gabriel's mouth tightened slightly. "Spring will be done whether I stay or not." "Aye," she said, "but a man should not leave a place while his heart is still sore from the first week of being there." He turned then and looked at her. Winifred's face was calm, almost plain in its firmness. She had never been a woman who spent many words where few would do. In childhood, she had comforted him by handing him bread, by taking a thorn from his palm, by standing beside him when their father was angry, not by filling the room with softness. Now she sat across from him, with the same old steadiness, older in the face, silver in the hair, but unchanged in the manner of her care. "I am not fit for this village," Gabriel said. "No," Winifred answered. "You are not fit for the village's memory of you. That is a different matter." The words settled between them. Gabriel looked down into his tea. Winifred picked up the leather strap again. "There are things needing done. Nothing grand. Nothing that requires proving yourself before witnesses. The upper gate has dropped. The lambing ropes need sorting before they go back in the chest. There is old wool in the shed that ought to be picked through. The shearing boards need sweeping, though no one has asked you to shear upon them." His jaw tightened at the last words. She saw it and continued more gently. "Stay until the hawthorn opens," she said. "That is all I ask." Gabriel gave a low breath, almost a laugh, though no humor came with it. "And if the hawthorn is late, then you will have to be patient with the hedge as well as yourself." For a moment, against his own will, something in him loosened. He did not promise. Winifred did not demand one. But after breakfast, when she rose and handed him the torn halter, he took it. The first task was awkward and slow. He sat on the bench beside the kitchen door, with the leather across his knees, and tried to guide the cord through the old holes using his left hand. The right could not hold the strap properly. It curled and trembled when he asked too much of it, and twice the leather slipped from his lap onto the stones. Each time he bent to retrieve it, anger rose in him, hot and sudden, not at the strap, not at the hand exactly, but at the smallness of the defeat. Winifred passed behind him carrying a pail. "Use the clamp from the wash-house," she said, without pausing. He almost refused, because refusal was easier than adaptation. Then he stood, went to the wash-house, found the small wooden clamp their father had once used for mending harness, and fixed the leather to the edge of the bench. With the strap held steady, his left hand could work. The stitches were uneven, the knot was clumsy, but the halter held. When he brought it in, Winifred examined it with the seriousness of a buyer at market. "That will do," she said. It was not praise, it was better than praise. Through the next days, she gave him more. He checked the lower gate first, then the upper one, beyond the turn in the lane, where sheep had rubbed against the post, until the latch no longer met properly. He could not lift the gate, as he once would have done, with one strong heave of shoulder and hand. Instead, he wedged a stone beneath it, raised it a little at a time, adjusted the hinge pin, and rested more often than he wished. The work took most of an afternoon. By the end, his left wrist ached, his back was stiff, and his right hand throbbed beneath the cuff from having tried, uselessly, to assist. But when the gate swung shut and the latch settled cleanly into place, Gabriel stood a while looking at it. No one saw. No one clapped him on the shoulder. No one said he had been quick. The gate simply closed as it ought. That evening, he slept more deeply. After that came the ropes. Winifred brought them from a chest in the small outbuilding, smelling of lanolin, dust, and old summer weather. Gabriel sat on an upturned crate in the yard and sorted them into piles, good, frayed, knotted, too short, needing washing. They were lambing ropes, tying ropes, binding twine, lengths used around the shearing season and then put away in haste when the weather had turned or the work had run beyond supper. His hands remembered knots before they remembered shears. The left hand did most of it, but the right, when given something small to brace against, could still serve. It could press a rope against his knee. It could feel the difference between a sound strand and one worn thin. It could hold briefly, not firmly, not with the old obedience, but enough to matter in small places. The discovery irritated him at first. He had wanted the hand restored, or useless, some hard, clean answer, but the body gave him no such mercy. It offered him a narrow middle ground, full of limits, full of negotiation, full of humiliating little adjustments. He had to learn what it could bear. He had to learn when it would fail. He had to learn not to hate it for failing before the task was finished. One afternoon, while he was sorting the ropes, Winifred came out with a basket of washing on her hip and paused beside him. "You have made 3 piles out of 2, she said. "That one is not fit for tying," Gabriel replied, "but it may do for marking bundles." Winifred looked at the 3rd pile, then she nodded. Useful distinction. She went on to the line. Gabriel sat still after she had gone, one length of rope lying across his knees. Useful distinction. The words were small, but they stayed with him. Not fit for one thing, still fit for another. The shearing shed waited. For nearly a week, Gabriel continued to avoid it, though every task seemed to move him nearer. He mended twine beside it. He cleared nettles from the wall opposite. He carried 2 broken boards from the cart shed and stacked them near its door. Each time he came close, the building seemed to grow larger in his mind, though in truth it was only stone, timber, dust, and old tools. At last, Winifred gave him the key. It was late afternoon. The light had begun to mellow, and the wind carried the faint smell of warm grass. She placed the iron key on the kitchen table after tea, beside his cup. "The shed wants airing," she said. Gabriel looked at the key. Winifred took up her knitting. He could have said no. She had left room for it. But the key lay there like a quiet fact. And something in him, worn down by days of small tasks and smaller victories, no longer had the strength to flee from a door. He took it. The shearing shed opened with difficulty. The lock resisted at first. He had to set his left shoulder against the door and work the key carefully, feeling the old iron complain before it yielded. When the door moved inward, a long strip of light fell across the floor and entered the darkness like water into a dry channel. The smell came first. Dust, old wool, wood, oil, dry straw, and beneath it all the faint, deep trace of lanolin that no amount of empty years could quite remove. Gabriel stood on the threshold and closed his eyes. The past did not rush at him. It rose slowly. The shed was quieter than memory. Of course it was. There were no men bent over sheep, no boys running fleeces to the table, no women calling from the yard, no blades opening and closing in bright rhythm, only motes turning in the late light, only tools hung on pegs, only boards darkened by old use, only the silence left behind when work has paused so long that even the walls seem to be listening. He stepped inside. His boot disturbed a thin skin of dust. Along one wall stood the shearing boards, warped slightly but still sound. A stack of old hurdles leaned near the far end. Hooks held loops of rope, sacks, a cracked lantern, a worn leather apron, and a bundle of sacking tied around something long and narrow. Near the high window, where the light gathered best, stood the wool table, its slats grey and dry. Gabriel touched nothing at first. He walked the length of the shed slowly, as one walks through a church after many years away, not because the place is holy, exactly, but because it has held too much life to be entered carelessly. Near the wool table, he stopped. There, beneath a folded cloth stiff with dust, lay several old fleeces, not whole, but remnants and rejected pieces, saved perhaps for mending pads, stuffing, or household use. The wool had yellowed slightly. Bits of chaff clung to it. Gabriel lifted a lock between the fingers of his left hand and felt the crimp, the grease, the soft resistance of it. At once, he remembered that shearing had never been only speed. Speed was what men spoke of afterward, leaning against gates, comparing numbers, praising the man who had cleared the most before supper. Speed made a name travel. Speed made boys stare. Speed made farmers nod and offer another day's work. But the work itself had been quieter than that. It had been the set of the knees around the sheep, firm without cruelty. It had been the angle of the animal's head, so it did not struggle for breath. It had been the small pause when the flank tightened. It had been knowing how wool grew over bone, where the skin lay loose, where the blade must flatten, where the hand must lighten. It had been trust, though no man in the yard would have called it by so tender a name. Gabriel stood with the wool in his left hand. His right hand moved slightly beneath the sleeve, not enough to reach, not enough to hold, but it moved. He spent the next hour cleaning, not much at first. He opened the far door to let the air through. He took a broom and swept the worst of the dust from the boards, slowly, changing hands when his left arm tired, though the right could manage only the pressure of a handle against the palm for a little while. He shook out sacking in the yard. He sorted old wool into baskets. Good for stuffing, too dirty, worth washing, fit only for kindling if Winifred would allow it. The labels formed in his mind without effort. This fleece had been cut too high along the back. This one had second cuts where a poor shearer had gone over the same place twice. This piece was clean near the shoulder. This lock showed a sheep that had grazed wet ground too long. He had not lost that knowledge. The thought came so quietly that he almost missed it. He had lost the quick hand. He had not lost the knowing. When evening cooled the shed, Gabriel closed the doors and returned to the house with dust on his trousers and wool fibers caught in his cuff. Winifred looked up from the hearth as he entered. "Well?" she asked. "It wants more sweeping." That is often true of old places. He washed at the basin. The water clouded grey around his fingers. After supper, he did not go upstairs at once. He sat near the fire while Winifred knitted, and for a long time neither of them spoke. The clock ticked. The flames drew low. Outside, the yard darkened into a soft, blue-black stillness. At last, Gabriel said, "There are fleeces in the shed, old ones. Some could be sorted." "I thought so." He looked at her then. "You planned this." Winifred did not deny it. "I laid work where work was needed. You found your own way to it." That was all she said. The next day, Gabriel returned to the shed, and the next. By then, the village had begun to settle around his presence. Fewer people stared when he passed. More nodded, as though he were once again part of the ordinary furniture of Renwick. Stone wall, church bell, smithy smoke, Gabriel Thorne, walking slowly, with his right hand hidden and a piece of twine in his pocket. The ache of being seen did not vanish, but it dulled into something he could carry. In the shed, however, he was less watched. There, he sorted wool. He learned again the language of texture, kempy strands, soft underwool, matted edges, clean locks, weathered tips. He spread pieces across the table and separated them by feel. The work did not require strength, only patience. The left hand lifted and opened. The right could rest lightly beside the wool, not grasping, only sensing. Sometimes the damaged fingers brushed the fleece and felt, through their dullness, warmth held from another season. It was not the old work, yet it belonged to it. One afternoon, while rain threatened but did not fall, Gabriel found the bundle of sacking that had hung near the high window. He took it down, untied the old cord with difficulty, and unwrapped it on the shearing board. Inside lay a pair of shears. His shears. For a moment, the shed seemed to withdraw around him. They were darker than he remembered, the steel needing care, the hinge stiff with disuse, but there was no mistaking them. The handles had been shaped by long use, polished where his fingers had once rested. Near the base of one blade was a small notch from the summer of 1870, when he had dropped them against a stone step and sworn aloud before his mother, earning a look that had silenced him faster than any scolding. Gabriel did not pick them up. He stood over them with his breath held. It was Winifred who had kept them. Of course it was. He had left them behind when he went to Bradford, not meaning to abandon them, only certain that he would return for them one season, and then another, and then not at all. She had wrapped them, hung them where damp would not easily reach, and said nothing for 25 years. He touched the handle with his left hand, cold, familiar, too familiar. He lifted them carefully. Their weight entered his arm like an old word spoken after long silence. He had forgotten how precisely they balanced, how the hinge resisted before yielding, how the blades opened, not widely, but enough, always enough. His left hand did not know them. It held them badly, the angle wrong, the pressure awkward. When he tried to close the blades, the motion dragged and shifted. The sound was small, a dull scrape, instead of the clean metal note he remembered. Gabriel set them down. His face burned, though no one was there. For the rest of the afternoon, he worked at other things. He swept beneath the wool table. He shook dust from sacks. He examined the old lantern. He sharpened a marking knife with slow, careful strokes. The shears lay on the board in the corner of his sight, patient as an accusation. At dusk, he wrapped them again, but he did not hang them back on the peg. He took them into the house. Winifred saw them beneath his arm when he entered. Her knitting paused for one breath, then continued. "You found them," she said. "Yes, I oiled them some years, then less often. They are in better condition than they should be. So are you," she said. Gabriel looked at her sharply, but she had lowered her eyes to the wool in her lap. That night, he slept poorly. The shears lay on the small chest beside his bed, still wrapped in sacking. He could feel their presence in the room, even in darkness. Once, near midnight, he reached out and touched the bundle, as if to make certain it had not been imagined. Outside, the moon moved behind thin cloud. The fields were quiet. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and then stopped. He thought of leaving again. The thought came less strongly now, but it still came. Leeds, Manchester, any place with streets large enough to swallow a man. But beside that thought stood another. The upper gate closing properly, the sorted ropes, the clean boards, the feel of wool beneath his damaged fingers, the shears, waiting like a question that had not yet finished being asked. Near dawn, he rose. The house was silent. Winifred was still asleep, or at least in her room. Gabriel dressed without lighting the lamp, took the wrapped shears, and went downstairs. The kitchen held the last coolness before morning. Ash lay soft in the grate. Through the window, the yard was grey and still. He went out to the back. Behind the house, beyond the pump and the herb patch, was a small paved space sheltered from the lane by the wall of the shed. It was a place for mending, washing, and setting down tools when weather allowed. The sky above it had only begun to pale. The hills were not yet fully shaped. The world seemed unfinished, and because it was unfinished, Gabriel felt less ashamed to be unfinished within it. He set the shears on the low bench. For a long while, he only looked at them. Then he unwrapped them, oiled the hinge from a small tin he had found in the shed, and worked the blades open and shut with his left hand. The movement was clumsy. The shears turned in his grip. The old handles pressed against the wrong places. His wrist tired quickly. He changed his stance. That helped a little. He tried again. The blades opened, closed, opened, slow, uneven, wrong. He stopped, breathing through his nose, the way he had once breathed when a sheep struggled beneath him and impatience would only make things worse. Again. This time, he held the shears lower and let his shoulder guide more of the motion. His left hand still lacked the cleverness the right had once possessed, but the arm was stronger than the fingers, the shoulder steadier than the wrist. The movement was ugly. There was no grace in it, but the blades closed. He took a lock of old wool from his pocket, one he had brought from the shed the evening before, without quite admitting why. He held it against the bench with the edge of his right hand, not gripping, only weighing it down. The first cut failed. The wool slipped away. The second cut caught too high and chopped through the fibers roughly. The third twisted the shears in his hand, sending a sharp pain up his left thumb. Gabriel closed his eyes. A flush of shame rose so hard that he nearly gathered the shears and threw them into the dark corner by the wall. Not because the wool mattered, not because anyone had seen, because the failure was so small and still so complete. A man could bear a grand loss more easily, perhaps, than the daily proof of it in little things. He stood still until the shame passed from heat into weariness. Then he picked up the wool again. This time, he did not try to make the hand remember. He let the whole body think. Feet apart, knees loose, shoulder low, breath steady. The right hand only as a resting place, the left not forced into quickness, the blades guided forward instead of snapped shut. The cut was poor, but it was a cut. Gabriel looked down at the severed lock lying on the bench. No pride came, not yet, only a quiet, bewildered grief. Then, beneath it, something else. He tried again. By the time the sun cleared the far hill, the bench was scattered with ragged bits of wool. His left hand ached. His right had begun to tremble from the small effort of pressing and steadying. His back was stiff, and the shears had left a red mark across his palm. Nothing he had done would have been acceptable in a yard. No farmer would have paid for such work. No young man would have envied it. Still, he had not stopped. He was bending over another lock of wool when he heard a faint sound near the corner of the shed. Not loud, only the slight shift of a boot on stone. Gabriel straightened at once. The yard seemed suddenly too bright. Near the shadow of the wall, half hidden by the open side of the shed, stood a boy of about 14, thin-shouldered, cap in hand, his face pale with the alarm of someone who has seen what he was not meant to see and does not yet know whether to run. Gabriel knew him by his eyes before he knew him by name. Peter Kemp, Silas's son. For several moments neither of them spoke. The shears hung in Gabriel's left hand, awkward and exposed. His right hand rested on the bench among the torn wool, the curled fingers plainly visible in the morning light. Gabriel felt the old instinct to hide it. He did not move quickly enough. Peter looked from the hand to the shears, then back to Gabriel's face. There was no laughter in him, no bright cruelty, only a grave, startled attention, as if he had come upon not a shameful thing but a difficult one. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Thorne," the boy said at last. "I did not mean to spy." Gabriel's voice came rougher than he intended. "Then you should learn to walk louder." Peter lowered his eyes. "Yes, sir." The hills behind him were filling with morning light. In the fields, the sheep had begun to move, slow and wool-heavy through the grass. Gabriel set the shears down on the bench. "You had better go," he said. Peter did not go at once. He looked at the wool scattered there, at the awkward cuts, at the old shears, and then, with the dangerous honesty of the young, asked quietly, "Why do you move your shoulder first?" Gabriel stared at him. Peter swallowed, but continued. "When the men shear at father's yard, they mostly use the wrist. Quick, like this." He made a small motion with his hand, then seemed to remember himself and let it fall. "But you were moving from here." He touched his own shoulder. The question settled into the cool morning air. Gabriel looked down at the shears. He had thought the boy had seen only failure. Instead, the boy had seen the beginning of a method Gabriel himself had not yet understood. For a long moment, he did not answer. Then he said, "Because the wrist is not enough." Peter nodded slowly, as if this were not a disappointment, but a lesson. The sun rose a little higher over Renwick. The torn wool lay pale across the bench. The old shears waited between them, no longer quite a relic, not yet a tool again, but something in between. Gabriel drew his right hand back beneath his sleeve. Peter saw the movement and looked away, not in disgust, but in courtesy. That, more than anything, kept Gabriel from sending him off at once. "Go home," Gabriel said, quieter now. "Your father will be needing you." Peter nodded. He turned toward the lane, then stopped. "Mr. Thorne?" Gabriel did not answer, but he looked up. "I won't tell." The boy said it simply, without drama, without making a bargain of it. Then he went, slipping around the side of the shed and down the path toward the fields, leaving Gabriel alone in the brightening yard with the old shears, the ragged wool, and the strange feeling that something he had meant to keep hidden had not been ruined by being seen. Peter Kemp did not come again that morning. For the rest of the day, Gabriel found himself listening for footsteps when there were none. He told himself it was only irritation, only the unpleasant feeling of having been discovered in a private failure. And yet, each time the yard gate moved in the wind or a loose board gave a small knock against the shed wall, he looked up before he meant to. The boy's question had stayed with him in a way he did not like. It had been a simple question, almost an innocent one, but it had gone directly to the place Gabriel had not yet dared to examine. "Why do you move your shoulder first?" All afternoon, as he sorted the remaining old wool and swept the corners of the shed, Gabriel repeated the words without wanting to. He had believed he was only making poor attempts at an old skill with the wrong hand. He had believed the awkward motions meant nothing, except that he could no longer do what he had once done. But Peter had seen movement where Gabriel had seen only failure. The boy had noticed not what was missing, but what had begun to change. That troubled Gabriel more than pity would have done. Pity he knew how to refuse. He could turn his face from it, draw down his sleeve, make his voice hard, and let the other person retreat. But attention was different. Honest attention did not ask to be comforted. It simply stood there, quiet and inconvenient, holding up a lamp to something that had been trying to form in the dark. By evening, the sky had softened into a pale, washed blue, with small clouds gathered above the upper fields like folded linen. Winifred was in the garden, cutting young rhubarb near the wall, when Gabriel came from the shed, with the old shears wrapped once more in sacking. He had meant to take them upstairs, but when he reached the kitchen door, he stopped and looked out across the yard instead. Winifred glanced at him, but did not ask. That was one of her mercies. She knew when a question would close a door more quickly than silence. After supper, Gabriel sat near the hearth while she darned a stocking by lamplight. The room held the small sounds of evening, the tick of the clock, the settling of coal in the grate, the faint scrape of Winifred's needle passing through wool. Outside, sheep called to one another across the darkening pastures, their voices softened by distance, until they seemed less like animals and more like the hills remembering themselves. At last Winifred said, "Silas's lad was by the lower lane this morning." Gabriel looked up. "So you saw him?" "I saw his cap over the wall," she said. "Then I saw him go away faster than he came." Gabriel looked back at the fire. "He caught me making a fool of myself." Winifred did not answer at once. She drew the needle through, turned the stocking, and inspected the place where the heel had worn thin. "Children do not always know what is foolish," she said. "Sometimes that makes them better witnesses." Gabriel's mouth tightened. "He is not a child exactly. No, that is often the worst age. Old enough to be ashamed, young enough to still ask what he sees." Gabriel was silent. Winifred tied off the thread and laid the stocking in her lap. "Peter Kemp has been wanting to shear since last summer." Gabriel frowned slightly. "Silas said nothing of it. Silas would not. He thinks wanting a thing should make a boy naturally good at it. Peter is not naturally good at it." There was no cruelty in her voice, only the plain knowledge of a village where every attempt, every stumble, every small humiliation eventually passed through several kitchens before finding its way back to the person concerned. "He is clumsy," Winifred continued. "Gets in the sheep's way. Pulls when he ought to hold. Hurries when he ought to wait. Silas loses patience, and Peter loses whatever sense he had." Gabriel looked into the fire and remembered the boy's face in the yard, grave and embarrassed, but not mocking, thin shoulders, cap in hand, a question asked because the answer mattered. "His father is a good shearer," Gabriel said. "Aye," said Winifred, "and a good farmer, but not every man who knows a thing knows how to give it away." The words rested in the room. Gabriel heard them, though he pretended to be watching the fire. The next morning came clear and colder. A faint silver frost lay in the hollows of the field before the sun touched them, and the grass near the pump glittered as if each blade had been carefully edged with light. Gabriel rose before Winifred, more from restlessness than intention, and carried the shears out to the sheltered space behind the house. He told himself he would work only a little while. The left hand had been sore the night before, and the damaged right hand ached with a deep, dull weather pain that had no need of weather to announce itself. Still, he unwrapped the shears. He oiled the hinge again, wiped the blades, and laid several locks of old wool across the bench. For a time he only practiced opening and closing the blades, learning the new resistance in his left hand. The old skill had lived in the right hand like a bird, returning to the same branch year after year. The left had no such memory. It was obedient in larger tasks, strong enough to carry, hold, sweep, lift, and mend, but when asked for delicacy, it became strangely blunt, as if each finger had to be spoken to separately. Gabriel stood with his feet apart, knees softened, shoulder low. He breathed in. He let the blades open. He breathed out. He closed them. The movement was still slow, still ugly, but not quite as wild as before. He tried again with a lock of wool held beneath the side of his right hand. The pressure was poor, yet enough to keep the wool from slipping at once. He guided the shears forward, not from the wrist this time, but from the shoulder and elbow, allowing the hand to follow rather than command. The cut came cleaner, not clean, cleaner. Gabriel stared at it for a moment. Then he did it again. By the time the sun had risen above the low roof of the shed, the bench was scattered with wool, some hacked and uneven, some cut with a rough but visible line. He had begun to understand that he could not imitate the old motion. The attempt to do so only brought pain and anger. The new motion had to be larger, slower, almost humbler. It had to begin before the hand. It had to use the stance, the breath, the weight of the arm. The shears could no longer be an extension of quick fingers. They had to become part of the whole body. A sound came near the wall. This time Gabriel did not start so sharply. He looked up. Peter Kemp stood almost exactly where he had stood the morning before, though now he was less hidden. His cap was in both hands, and his boots were wet from crossing the lower meadow. He looked as if he had spent several minutes deciding whether to step forward and had not yet fully forgiven himself for doing so. Gabriel set the shears down. "You were told to walk louder," he said. Peter flushed. "Yes, sir. And yet here you are again, quiet as fog." "I tried to cough by the gate," Peter said, "but you did not hear." Against himself, Gabriel looked toward the gate. "A poor cough, then." "Yes, sir." The boy did not smile, but his face eased a little. Gabriel wiped the blades with a cloth. "Does your father know you are here?" Peter looked down at his cap. "That is an answer," Gabriel said. "I am not meant to be at Kemp's yard until 8, Peter said quickly. "I finished bringing in the lower ewes, and father went to look at the far wall with Mr. Naylor. I thought I could come by before breakfast." "You thought wrong," Peter nodded. "Very likely." Gabriel looked at him more closely then. The boy was narrow and long-limbed, in the uncertain way of 14, as if his bones had grown faster than his confidence. His jacket sleeves were slightly short. A pale scratch marked one cheek. There was dried mud near one knee, and on his left thumb a small cut, the kind boys got from trying to do work before they understood the tool. Gabriel knew that kind of cut. "What do you want?" he asked. Peter lifted his eyes. "I wanted to see if you still moved from the shoulder." Gabriel's face hardened before he could stop it. "I am not a show at a fair." "No, sir, I did not mean that." "Then say what you mean." Peter swallowed. The morning light caught the edge of his hair beneath the cap, making it look almost straw-colored. "I cannot make my wrist do it," he said at last. "When father shows me, it looks easy. But when I try, the sheep shifts, and I pull too hard, or I catch the wool twice, or I get frightened of cutting the skin, and then I make it worse. Father says I think too much, but when I try not to think, I do it badly faster." Gabriel looked away toward the field. There it was. Not a request made boldly, not admiration, not pity, only one clumsy soul, recognizing another at the edge of a difficult craft. Peter continued, more quietly. "Yesterday, when you moved, it was slower, but it seemed as if you knew where the rest of yourself was." Gabriel let out a low breath. The boy had a troublesome eye. Most men would have seen only the wrong hand, the ruined hand, the failed cut, the disgrace of a man who had once been praised, now practicing on old wool before sunrise. Peter had seen the shoulder, the breath, the shift in balance. Perhaps because he was not yet good enough to be proud. Perhaps because awkwardness made him observant. Perhaps because those who cannot enter a craft by the front gate begin looking for side doors. Gabriel picked up one of the locks of wool and laid it across the bench. "Come here," he said. Peter stepped forward at once, then stopped, unsure whether he had been invited close or only nearer. Gabriel pointed with the shears. "There, where you can see." Peter came to the end of the bench. "I am not teaching you," Gabriel said. "No, sir, and you are not to repeat this in the village." No, sir. If your father asks where you have been, you will tell him the truth. Peter's face fell. Gabriel looked at him. Peter looked back, miserable but attentive. The truth, Gabriel repeated, may be short, but it ought not be false. Peter nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Gabriel adjusted the wool with the edge of his right hand. He did not hide the hand this time, though every part of him wanted to. Peter saw it. Gabriel knew he saw it. But the boy's eyes did not linger in the wrong way. He watched the work. That mattered. This is not shearing, Gabriel said. This is only wool on a bench. A sheep breathes. A sheep leans. A sheep decides, often at the worst possible moment, that it has business elsewhere. Wool on a bench is patient because it is dead to the matter. Still, there are things to learn. He lifted the shears in his left hand. You think the cut begins here? He moved his fingers slightly. Or here? He bent the wrist. That is what you see when a good man works quickly. But by then, the cut has already begun. Peter leaned closer. Gabriel shifted his stance. It begins in the feet. If you are standing wrong, the hand will hurry to save you. Then the sheep feels your hurry and fights it. Stand so your body does not have to ask permission from your hand. He opened the blades, breathed in, and brought his shoulder forward slightly as he closed them through the wool. The cut was not beautiful, but it held a line. Peter's eyes followed it with care. You see? Gabriel asked. Peter nodded. You did not snatch at it. No. Snatching is what a man does when he is late to his own movement. The boy's brow furrowed, not fully understanding, but wanting to. Gabriel laid another lock down. Now you. Peter stared at him. I thought you were not teaching me. I am not, Gabriel said. I am correcting the air near you. For the first time, Peter almost smiled. He took the shears awkwardly. In his hand, they looked too large, too old, too serious for him. He placed the wool on the bench, bent over it, and immediately tightened his shoulders. Stop, Gabriel said. Peter froze. If you begin like a frightened nail, you will end like one. Peter straightened. Feet first, Gabriel said. Peter looked down and moved his boots apart, knees loose. The boy bent them too much. Not as if you are about to sit on the floor, just enough that the ground may speak to you. Peter adjusted, shoulder down. Breathe before you cut. Peter breathed in with such deliberate obedience that Gabriel had to turn his face slightly away. Not like a church organ, he said. Like a living creature. Peter breathed again, more naturally this time. Now, the shears closed on the wool. The cut was poor, worse than Gabriel's. It chewed through the lock and left a jagged edge like torn grass. Peter's face reddened. Gabriel took the wool and examined it. Again, I spoiled it. It was old wool before you touched it. You have not robbed a duke. Peter tried again. The second cut twisted. The third missed nearly altogether. The fourth was better only because it was slower. But Gabriel saw, beneath the clumsiness, that the boy listened with his whole body. He did not have much skill. He had too much haste, too much fear of his father's voice already living inside his hand. Yet when Gabriel told him to pause, he paused. When told to feel the line before cutting, he tried to feel it. When the shears caught, he did not blame the wool. That was something. After several attempts, Gabriel held out his hand for the shears. That is enough. Peter looked disappointed. But I have only just begun to understand it. That is why it is enough. Too much at once turns understanding into mud. Peter released the shears reluctantly. The yard had brightened. From the lane came the sound of cartwheels and a man calling to another near the lower wall. Renwick was waking fully now. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys beyond the hedge. Somewhere a pail rang against stone. Peter looked toward the lane with a start. "I should go." "You should have gone before you came." "Yes, sir." But he did not move immediately. His eyes returned to the wool, then to the shears, then to Gabriel. "Mr. Thorne." Gabriel wrapped the shears in the cloth. "What now? Were you truly the quickest in the Dales?" Gabriel's hands stilled. The question might have hurt had it been asked with admiration. It might have cut had it been asked with doubt. But Peter asked it as a boy might ask whether a hill had always been where it stood. Not to flatter, only to place the present beside the past and see how they belong to one another. "Once," Gabriel said. Peter nodded. "Did that make you the best?" Gabriel looked at him then. The old answer rose first. Of course, that was how men had measured it. Numbers by noon, fleeces by dusk, farmers calling a name down the line, other shearers glancing sideways and working harder because you were there. Quickness had shone so brightly in memory that for years Gabriel had mistaken it for the whole lamp. But in the shed, among old wool and damaged hands, and a boy who could not hurry well, the answer no longer seemed so simple. "It made me wanted," Gabriel said at last. "That is not always the same thing." Peter received this with a seriousness beyond his years. Then he put on his cap. "May I come tomorrow?" "No." The boy's face fell so openly that Gabriel almost regretted the sharpness. "No," Gabriel repeated, "because tomorrow your father may need you early, and because if you come sneaking every morning, you will turn this into mischief, and mischief ruins good work." Peter looked down. "Yes, sir." Gabriel tied the sacking around the shears. "You may come the morning after," he said, "if your chores are done, if you have permission to be away long enough to cross the lane, if you speak of it to no one as though it were a secret worth boasting of, and if you remember that I am not taking pupils." Peter looked up, hope moving across his face before he could hide it. "What shall I bring?" "Nothing." "No wool?" "I have wool. My own shears." "Not yet." A bad habit learned with a sharp tool is still a bad habit, only bloodier. Peter nodded quickly. "And Peter," the boy straightened at the use of his name, "you are not to be quick." Peter blinked. "Not quick?" "Not yet. Perhaps not for a long while. Perhaps not ever in the way your father means it." A shadow crossed the boy's face, familiar and painful. Gabriel saw it and spoke more gently. "There are worse things than being slow." Peter held his cap in both hands again. "Father does not think so. Your father has had the good fortune to be quick at things that needed quickness. Men often mistake their own gift for the only proper shape of work." Peter stood very still. Gabriel looked toward the fields, where sheep grazed in the morning light, carrying their thick spring fleeces as patiently as hills carry weather. "When you come," he said, "you will stand first. No cutting, no showing me what you think you know. You will stand until you can feel where your weight is. Then you will look at the wool. Then perhaps you may touch the shears." Peter nodded, solemn, as if receiving a rule of great consequence. "Yes, Mr. Thorne, and no hurry, no hurry." The boy said it almost like a promise. Then he turned and went quickly toward the lane, though not so quickly as before. At the gate, he paused once and looked back. Gabriel had already bent to gather the scattered wool, but he knew the boy was watching him. This time the watching did not feel like exposure. It felt, though Gabriel would not yet have admitted it, like the beginning of being useful in a form he had not expected. When Peter disappeared beyond the wall, the yard became quiet again. Gabriel remained beside the bench, the shears wrapped beneath his hand, the morning sun warming the back of his coat. In the distance, from Kemp's direction, came the faint sound of a man's voice, then the answering call of another. Work was beginning across the village. The old life was moving without him, as he had known it would. And yet, on the bench before him lay several poor cuts, one cleaner cut, and the place where a boy's hand had tried to learn slowness. Gabriel gathered the wool carefully. He did not feel restored. He did not feel healed. But for the first time since returning to Renwick, he did not feel quite finished. Peter came 2 mornings later, just as Gabriel had allowed, though he arrived with such careful noise that the warning was almost comical. His boots scraped deliberately on the stones near the gate. He coughed once, badly, then twice, worse than before, and when Gabriel looked up from the bench behind the shed, the boy was standing with his cap in his hands, trying very hard to appear as if he had not been waiting since dawn. "You have learned to announce yourself," Gabriel said. Peter flushed. "I thought it best, sir." "It is best to walk like a person who belongs to his own feet." "Yes, sir." Gabriel did not invite him closer at once. The morning was damp and pearly, the sort of Dale's morning when the hills seemed to have been drawn in soft charcoal and then left unfinished at the edges. The grass beyond Winifred's wall was heavy with dew. Farther off, sheep moved in slow white patches across the fields, their fleeces thick with the last burden of spring. From the direction of Kemp's farm came the faint sounds of preparation, a gate being dragged open, a man calling across a yard, the hollow knock of wood against wood as boards were set in place for the coming shearing. Peter's eyes turned toward the sound before he could stop them. Gabriel saw it. "Your father knows you are here. He knows I finished the lower troughs," Peter said carefully. "He said I was to keep out from underfoot until breakfast." "That is not the same answer." "No, sir." Gabriel looked at him for a long moment, then let it pass. "Come here." Peter came at once, then checked himself and slowed, as if remembering that haste itself had become part of the lesson. Gabriel almost smiled, though the expression did not reach his mouth. On the low bench lay no shears that morning, only several bundles of old wool, a coil of rope, and a folded sack filled with sand. Peter noticed the absence immediately. "Are we not cutting today?" "No." The boy tried to hide his disappointment and failed. "Yes, sir. You sound as if I have taken away your supper. I only thought that you would come here, take up the shears, learn some clever turn of the wrist, and return to Kemp's yard, changed enough that your father would stare." Peter lowered his eyes. Gabriel's voice was not unkind, but it was plain. That is a story boys tell themselves when they do not yet understand work. The words stung. Gabriel saw it happen, saw the boy's shoulders draw inward, saw the old shame rise in him before it had even been named. It was the same shame Gabriel had felt in the yard, with the ragged wool and the old shears turning badly in his left hand. Small failure, public in the mind, even when no one else was there. So Gabriel softened the next words. If you want to learn quickly, go home. Your father can teach quickness better than I can. If you want to learn slowly, stand there. Peter stood where Gabriel pointed. Feet apart, Peter moved his boots. Not like a soldier waiting for inspection. You are not trying to impress the ground. You are trying to feel it. Peter adjusted again. Knees loose. The boy bent them. Less. Peter straightened slightly. Shoulders down. Peter dropped them too much, making himself look defeated. Not dead, only quiet. Peter tried again. Gabriel stepped around him, watching not with the sharp impatience of a master finding fault, but with the troubled concentration of a man discovering his own thoughts as he spoke them aloud. He had never taught in this way before. In his younger days, he had shown younger men how to shear by doing it faster than they could follow and expecting them to catch what they could. That had seemed natural then. A quick hand believed the world should learn by chasing it. Now he saw how little kindness there had been in that. He picked up the sand-filled sack and placed it against Peter's legs. "This is not a sheep," Gabriel said, "but it has weight. Feel it before you move it." Peter looked down at the sack. "Do not wrestle it," Gabriel said. "Do not apologize to it either. Put your hand there. No, lower. Let the weight come against you. If you pull first, you have already lost the animal's trust." Peter placed both hands awkwardly against the sack. "Breathe." Peter breathed in with too much effort. Gabriel waited. After a while, the boy breathed again, more naturally. "There," Gabriel said. "Now shift it." Slowly, Peter tried. The sack sagged and slipped. He grabbed at it, lost balance, and nearly knocked his knee against the bench. His face went red. "I'm sorry." "The sack is not offended." Peter glanced up, uncertain whether he was being mocked. Gabriel moved the sack back into place. Again. They spent the first half hour doing nothing that resembled shearing. Peter stood, shifted weight, bent, paused, learned where his feet were, learned how quickly panic traveled from the mind into the fingers. Gabriel corrected him in short, dry phrases, not cruel, not warm exactly, but exact. And after each correction, Peter tried again. By the time Winifred opened the kitchen door and looked out, Peter's forehead was damp, though the morning was cool. "No blood yet?" she asked. "Only pride," Gabriel said. "Then you are both fortunate." She left 2 cups of tea on the stone ledge and went back inside without another word. Peter looked at the cup as if he were unsure whether he was allowed to touch anything belonging to the household. "Drink," Gabriel said. "A boy cannot learn balance if he is faint with wanting approval." Peter took the cup carefully. They stood in silence for a little while, the steam rising between them. Beyond the wall, Renwick was waking into the full work of spring. Somewhere a cart passed with a slow wooden creak. A dog barked once. The sheep in Winifred's upper pasture moved closer to the boundary stones, lowering their heads into the wet grass. Peter looked toward them. Gabriel followed his gaze. "You want the shears?" "Yes, sir." "You want the part that looks like the trade?" Peter said nothing. Gabriel set down his cup. "Most boys do. Most men too. They want the sound of the blades, the falling fleece, the number called at the end of the day. They do not want the standing, the waiting, the knowing when an animal is about to fight them before it moves." Peter listened. "A sheep will tell you nearly everything," Gabriel continued. "Not in words, in the breath, in the shoulder, in the way the weight changes just before the legs go. If you are too busy proving yourself, you will miss it. Peter looked down at his hands. Father says I think too much. Perhaps you think too loudly. The boy frowned. Gabriel picked up one of the old locks of wool and held it out. There is a difference. Only then did he unwrap the shears. Peter's face changed at once. Hope came into it so quickly that Gabriel almost put the tool away again, only to teach him patience. But there was such hunger in the boy's attention that Gabriel remembered his own first longing for the craft, not for praise, not at the beginning, but for the strange beauty of a fleece opening cleanly beneath a blade. He placed the shears in Peter's hand. Do not cut. Peter froze. No, sir. Hold them. Peter held them. Feel the weight. Do not command it yet. The old shears looked ungainly in the boy's hand, though not as wrong as they had looked in Gabriel's left. Peter's fingers tightened around the handle. Loosen. Peter loosened. Too much. You are not dropping a dead fish. Peter adjusted, caught between embarrassment and concentration. Gabriel moved behind him, not touching at first, only observing. Then, with a hesitation he concealed by making the gesture brisk, he brought his damaged right hand forward and rested two curled fingers lightly against Peter's wrist. Peter went very still. Gabriel felt the boy notice. He felt the instant of awareness pass through him. But Peter did not flinch. He did not look down. He kept his eyes on the shears, as if the hand guiding him were only a hand. That small courtesy steadied Gabriel more than he expected. Open, he said. Peter opened the blades. Not so wide. Enough is enough. Peter adjusted. Close. The blades came together with a dull, uneven scrape. Again, they practiced the motion without wool. Open, close. Open, close. Peter's wrist wanted to hurry. His fingers wanted to finish before the arm had begun. Gabriel stopped him each time. Shoulder first. Peter tried. Elbow follows. Again. Wrist last. Again. Breath before blade. Again. Slowly, very slowly, the movement began to lose its panic. When Gabriel finally laid wool across the bench, Peter looked almost afraid of it. Now, Gabriel said, one cut, poor or clean, it does not matter. But it must be honest. Peter swallowed, set his feet, lowered his shoulder, and breathed. The shears closed. The cut was rough, but not torn. Peter stared at it. Gabriel lifted the wool and inspected the edge. Better. The boy's face lit. Then he tried to hide it and made himself look solemn instead. Do not look so mournful over improvement, Gabriel said. It will think you do not want it. Peter's mouth moved, almost smiling. Again? Again. They worked until the church bell marked the hour. Peter's cuts remained uneven, but they no longer carried the same frantic damage. He began to pause before each attempt. He began to notice when his shoulders rose. Once, before Gabriel corrected him, he stopped himself, reset his feet, and began again. That pleased Gabriel more than the cleaner cut. It also unsettled him. Teaching the boy made the morning pass differently. The pain in his right hand was still there. His left still ached from its own practice. Nothing had been mended in any simple way. And yet, as Peter bent over the bench, trying with painful seriousness to learn slowness, Gabriel felt some part of the old craft moving through him, not as performance, not as proof, but as knowledge passing from one body into another. It was not the work he had lost, yet it belonged to it. When Peter finally set down the shears, His face was tired and bright. "I was not quick," he said. "No, but it was better." "Yes." Peter looked toward Kemp's farm. The sounds from that direction had grown busier. "Father will be wondering where I am." "Then go before wondering becomes shouting." Peter nodded and reached for his cap. At the gate, he paused. "May I come again?" Gabriel wrapped the shears slowly. "Tomorrow," he said, "if your chores are done." Peter's relief was plain. "Yes, Mr. Thorne." "And Peter," the boy turned. "You are still not to be quick." Peter nodded, more firmly this time. "No hurry." He went down the lane with his cap pulled low and his boots dark from the wet grass. Gabriel watched until the wall hid him. Then he looked back at the bench, at the scattered wool, at the faint line of one cut that was almost clean. His right hand trembled a little from the morning's work. Gabriel covered it with his sleeve, but not as quickly as before. Agatha Vane came on a Thursday afternoon when the sky over Renwick had lowered into a soft grey, and the wind moved through the lane with the damp smell of rain not yet fallen. Gabriel was alone behind the shed, sorting the old wool into small heaps, keeping aside the pieces that still had enough length for practice. Peter had gone an hour before, called back to Kemp's farm by the sound of his father's voice carrying across the lower fields. The bench was still marked with the morning's work, uneven cuts, smoother cuts, little signs of effort that no one passing by would have understood as progress. Gabriel heard the gate before he saw her. It was not Peter's careful scrape of boots, nor Winifred's quiet step from the kitchen. This was a firmer sound, slow but decided, the kind made by someone who had no intention of apologizing for arriving. When Gabriel looked up, Agatha Vane stood just inside the yard, one gloved hand resting on the top of her walking stick, the other holding a narrow leather case darkened by age and weather. She was smaller than Gabriel remembered, though perhaps everyone from his youth had become smaller in the strange room of memory. Her back was straight, her bonnet plain, her grey hair pinned close beneath it, and her eyes had the sharp, clear patience of a person who had spent a lifetime noticing what others preferred not to see. Gabriel had known her name before he had known her. When he was a boy, men had spoken of Agatha Vane in the half-amused, half-dismissive way men sometimes used when a woman did a thing too well to be ignored, but not in the manner they had decided to admire. "Mr. Thorne," she said. "Mrs. Vane, I hear you are teaching Silas Kemp's lad to shear." Gabriel's face tightened. "Then the village has found itself with too little honest work." "The village has always done two labours at once," Agatha said. "Its own work and everybody else's business." She came closer without waiting to be invited, her boots dark at the edges from the wet lane. Gabriel did not move the wool away. He only set the shears beside the bench, as if the sight of them did not matter. Agatha's eyes went to the tool, then to his covered right hand, then back to the wool. She did not stare. She did not soften her face. In that, she was kinder than many who had tried to be kind. "May I?" she asked, touching one of the cut locks. Gabriel gave a small nod. Agatha lifted the wool and turned it in her fingers. The cut was Peter's, not his, jagged along one side, but cleaner through the middle. She studied it as seriously as though it were a fine fleece brought to market. "The boy is afraid of hurting the sheep," she said. Gabriel looked at her. "That is not the worst beginning," she continued. "A worse one is wanting only to prove he can master it." He is slow. So was I. Gabriel said nothing. Agatha laid the wool down and opened the leather case she had brought. Inside lay a pair of shears, shorter than Gabriel's, with handles worn smooth and blades kept in beautiful order. They were old, but not neglected. The metal had the soft, dark gleam of a thing used, cleaned, and understood. "These were mine," she said. Gabriel looked at them for a long moment. "I did not know you had kept them. Men thought I ought to be ashamed of them. That seemed reason enough not to throw them away." There was no bitterness in her voice, only something older and steadier than bitterness. Gabriel remembered then. Agatha, in the outer yards during shearing season, never in the main line with the men, but called when a ewe was restless, when a lamb had tangled wool, when an old sheep would not settle under rough hands. She had worked where the official praise did not reach. Slow, they had called her. Careful, when they meant lesser. Useful, when they meant not equal. Agatha took up her shears and opened them once. The sound was soft and exact. "The Dales likes one shape of shearer," she said. "Quick wrist, strong hand, straight back. No complaint by noon, no trembling by dusk. A man who can be counted in numbers." Gabriel looked toward the fields beyond the wall. "And if one does not fit that shape," he asked, "then one is called an exception if useful, and a nuisance if not." The words settled between them with the quiet weight of truth. Gabriel had believed, since returning to Renwick, that he had fallen alone from the old measure of worth. He had thought his injury had cast him outside the trade like a broken tool put at the back of a drawer. But Agatha had stood near that same boundary for years, not because her hands were ruined, but because they had never been the kind of hands men expected to praise. She picked up one of Gabriel's locks and placed it on the bench. "Show me how you hold them now." Gabriel almost refused. Pride rose in him by habit, tired but still obedient. Then he looked at her shears, at the worn handles, at the calmness in her face, and understood that Agatha Vane had not come to pity him. She had come because she knew something about being made smaller by other people's definitions, and because knowledge, once carried long enough in silence, sometimes asks to be given away. He took up his shears with his left hand. The right hand stayed close to his side. Agatha watched. "No," she said. Gabriel stopped. "You have put that hand away before the work has begun." His jaw tightened. "It cannot hold. I did not say it could." She came to the bench and stood beside him, close enough that he could smell lavender water and damp wool. With a firmness that allowed no drama, she indicated his right hand. "Let it rest there, not to grip, to know." Gabriel looked down at the hand he had spent weeks hiding. The fingers did not straighten fully. The old strength had gone from them. There were mornings when buttons defeated him, evenings when the bones ached, as if the machinery at Bradford had not finished its work. He had thought of the hand as absence made visible. Slowly, he drew it from the sleeve and placed it near the wool. Agatha did not look away. She did not look too long either. "There," she said. "Let the side of it feel the wool's lift. Let it tell the left hand when the pressure changes. A hand need not command to be of use." Gabriel breathed in. He set the wool beneath the weakened hand, not pressing, only resting. With the left, he opened the shears. The right hand felt almost nothing at first. Then, faintly, through dull nerves and old pain, there came the smallest sense of resistance. Wool thickening, wool slipping, the place where pressure must ease. He closed the blades. The cut was short, but it was cleaner than he expected. Agatha nodded once. Again. He tried again. The second cut caught. The third went crooked. The fourth held a steadier line. Gabriel felt anger rise, then fade, before it could harden. This was not the old work. It would never be the old work. But something in the ruined hand, something he had dismissed as finished, had answered after all. Not strongly, not beautifully, but enough to be heard. Agatha closed her own shears and returned them to the case. "You have been asking the left hand to become the right," she said. "It cannot, no more than I could become one of Silas Kemp's men by pretending my bones were built like theirs. You must give each part its proper labor." Gabriel looked at his hands on the bench, one awkward with new responsibility, one damaged but not entirely silent. Outside, rain began at last, very lightly, touching the yardstones one by one. Agatha fastened the case. "Teach the boy that." Gabriel looked up. "Peter, and yourself, if there is time." For the first time that afternoon, something like amusement passed through her face. Gabriel did not smile, but his expression eased. When Agatha left, she walked slowly down the lane under the fine rain, her leather case tucked beneath one arm, as though it held not old shears, but a testimony no one had ever properly recorded. Gabriel remained by the bench until she disappeared beyond the wall. Then he looked again at the cut wool. His right hand ached, but beneath the ache, faint and difficult to trust, was the memory of pressure, of touch, of usefulness, returning in another form. Gabriel covered the hand with his sleeve. Then, after a moment, he uncovered it again. Silas Kemp found out on a clear morning, when the hills above Renwick had turned bright after 2 days of rain, and every sound in the village seemed to carry farther than usual. The stone walls shone dark where the water had dried slowly. The lanes were soft at the edges. In the fields, the sheep moved heavily under their spring fleeces, and the whole valley had begun to feel the nearness of shearing, as if the season itself were waiting with its sleeves rolled back. Peter came later than usual that morning. Gabriel noticed it before he admitted to himself that he was waiting. He had already swept the floor of the shed, laid out the old wool, checked the edge of the shears, and opened the door wide enough for the light to fall across the bench. He told himself that the boy had chores. He told himself that a farmer's son could not always slip away because an injured old shearer had found use in teaching him. Still, each small noise from the lane made him look up. At last, Peter appeared at the gate, but not with his usual careful eagerness. He came quickly, then slowed when he saw Gabriel watching. His cap was pulled low, and there was a tightness about his mouth that made him look younger than 14. "You are late," Gabriel said. "Yes, sir." "Trouble with the troughs?" "No, sir." Gabriel waited. Peter stepped inside and closed the gate behind him, though there was no reason to close it. "Father asked where I had been these mornings." Gabriel's left hand rested on the bench. The right, uncovered for work, curled slightly against the wool. "And you told him?" Peter looked down. "I did not want to lie." "No," Gabriel said quietly. "That is generally where trouble begins for honest people." Peter gave a faint, miserable smile, but it vanished at once. "He is angry." Gabriel had expected it. and still the words struck him somewhere old. Not surprise, not even fear, something more familiar than either, the knowledge of a door closing before he had fully decided whether he wished to enter. "What did he say?" Gabriel asked. Peter shifted his weight. "That I had no business learning tricks from a man who cannot shear a season's work." The shed seemed to grow still around them. Outside, a bird called from the hedge, a thin, bright sound, and then stopped. Gabriel looked at the shears on the bench. He did not touch them. "That sounds like your father." He did not mean, "Yes," Gabriel said. He did. Peter's face reddened, not with shame for himself, but with the confused pain of a boy who loved his father and had begun, unwillingly, to see the limits of him. Gabriel turned away and took up a piece of wool. "Then you had better go back." Peter stared. "But I came to learn, and now you have learned something. That is not fair." "No," Gabriel said, "it is not." The boy stood there, breathing hard, his hands opening and closing at his sides. He had learned enough from Gabriel, not to rush toward the shears, but not yet enough to keep his hurt from spilling over into movement. "I do not want to stop," Peter said. Gabriel's voice remained level. "Wanting has never kept a roof mended, a field drained, or a father from giving orders. But you said slow work still counts." "I said it was work," Gabriel answered. "I did not say the world would know what to do with it." Peter looked at him then, really looked, and Gabriel saw that the boy understood more than he wished him to. The lesson had gone beyond wool and weight and blades. It had stepped into the harder country where skill could be dismissed before it was understood, where a person could be measured by the part of him that no longer performed as expected. Before either of them could speak again, the yard gate opened. Silas Kemp came in without knocking. He was a broad man, weathered by years of hill wind and long mornings, with hands made thick by work, and a face that had learned sternness so thoroughly it had almost forgotten how to rest. He did not enter like a man looking for a quarrel. That might have been easier. He entered like a man, certain that the quarrel had already been decided. His eyes went first to Peter, then to Gabriel, then to the shears on the bench. "So it is true," he said. Peter stepped forward. "Father, be quiet." The words were not shouted, but they were heavy enough. Peter stopped. Gabriel stood behind the bench. He did not hide his hand. Not quickly enough, at least. Silas saw it. His gaze flickered there for a moment, not cruelly, but with the blunt discomfort of a man seeing damage he did not know how to name. "I did not ask him to come," Gabriel said. "No," Silas replied. "But you let him." Gabriel inclined his head once. "I did. I have men coming next week. I have near 600 sheep to get through if the weather holds. I have a boy who cannot keep his grip, cannot set his feet, cannot finish a row without tangling the fleece. And now I find him here, being taught to be slower." Peter's face tightened. Gabriel said, "He is being taught to be careful. In shearing season, careful without speed is a luxury, and speed without care is waste." Silas gave a short laugh, though there was no amusement in it. "You speak like a man who has not had to count a day's work in a long while." The words landed plainly. Gabriel felt them enter, and for a moment he was back in Bradford after the accident, sitting beside a narrow bed, listening to men speak softly in the passage, because they believed softness could keep truth from being heard. Not fit for the frame room, not likely to return to full use, compensation to be discussed, a life reduced to what could no longer be done. Peter looked from his father to Gabriel. "Mr. Thorne has helped me." Silas turned on him. "Has he? Can you shear a full fleece cleanly now?" "No, but can you keep pace with a team?" "No." "Can you take a place on the boards when men are waiting behind you?" Peter's mouth closed. Silas nodded once, as if the matter had answered itself. "Then you are learning dreams when work is needed." Gabriel's damaged hand began to ache. He placed it lightly against the bench, feeling the grain of the wood beneath the side of his fingers. Agatha's words returned to him. A hand need not command to be of use. He wondered whether the same could be said of a man. "I never promised to make him fast," Gabriel said. "That much is clear. I taught him not to frighten the sheep. I taught him how to feel the weight before he fights it. I taught him that a poor hand can improve if it is not shamed out of trying." Silas looked at him sharply. For a second, neither man spoke. The yard seemed to hold all the old things between them. Gabriel at 22, quick and praised, leaving Renwick with his name bright in other men's mouths. Silas, younger too, already steady, already tied to land and flock, and the practical measure of each day, the long absence, the return, the ruined hand, the village talk that had travelled faster than kindness. Silas's voice lowered. "You were a fine shearer once, Gabriel. Once." It was a small word, but it had a long blade. Gabriel felt Peter hear it, felt his own face remain still, because he would not give Silas the satisfaction of seeing where it had cut. "Yes," Gabriel said, "once." Silas looked away first, toward the fields beyond Winifred's wall. "Then you know what the season asks. I know what men ask of it, and I know what happens when wool is left on sheep and rain comes down. I know what happens when a boy thinks gentleness will do the work of skill. Gentleness is not the opposite of skill." "No," Silas said, "but neither is it a substitute for strength." Gabriel had no answer that would change him. He saw that clearly. Silas was not a foolish man. That made it worse. Foolishness could be dismissed. Silas had lived by hard measures, and hard measures had kept his farm standing. To him, Gabriel's new method looked like consolation dressed as craft, a way for a broken man and a clumsy boy to feel less useless in the shadow of real work. Peter said, very softly, "I was getting better." Silas turned to him, and something moved in his face, a brief pain, quickly covered by authority. "You will get better at home, doing as you are told. I do not learn when I am shouted at." The silence after that was deeper than any shout. Silas's jaw tightened. "You will not come here again." Peter's eyes shone, but he did not cry. "Father, you will not come here again," Silas repeated. "There is work enough at Kemp's without you wasting mornings." Gabriel looked at the boy. This was the moment to say something. He felt it, some defense, some firm declaration that Peter had a gift of attention, that slowness had begun to shape him, that a boy so often called clumsy had finally found a doorway into the craft. But the words met the old fear inside him and faltered there. Who was he to insist? A man with one good hand, a man not invited to the boards, a man practicing on old wool behind his sister's shed. So he said only, "You had better go with your father." Peter looked at him as if Gabriel had stepped back from him. That hurt most. Silas opened the gate. Peter followed, but at the threshold, He turned once, his face pale with disappointment. Gabriel wanted to tell him that the lessons had mattered, that a thing learned carefully did not vanish because a father forbade the path to it. Instead, he stood with his hand on the bench and watched the boy leave. The gate closed. After they were gone, the shed felt larger and emptier than before. The old wool lay in its small heaps. The shears rested where he had placed them. On the bench was a strip Peter had cut the day before, uneven at the beginning, steadier near the end. Gabriel picked it up, held it between finger and thumb, and then set it down again. He told himself Silas had only said what others were too polite to say. He told himself the village had been kind enough not to ask him to prove what could not be proved. He told himself Peter would forget these mornings once the real shearing began, and the noise of men, sheep, blades, and numbers filled his head. By noon, Winifred found him still in the shed. She stood in the doorway with a basket over one arm. "I saw Silas come." Gabriel did not answer, and Peter go. Still he said nothing. Winifred came inside and set the basket down. She did not touch the shears, did not fuss over the wool, did not offer one of those soft consolations that made pain feel clumsy for existing. "He has forbidden the boy," Gabriel said at last. "I thought he might. Then you are wiser than I am. I have known Silas longer than you have known disappointment." Gabriel gave a dry, tired sound that was almost a laugh. "That is a bold claim." Winifred looked at him steadily. "He fears what he cannot count. He counts well enough. I cannot shear as I did." "No," she said, "you cannot." The plainness of it should have hurt. Somehow, from her, it did not. "But Peter learned something here," she continued. "I saw him yesterday with the old ewe by the lower gate. He waited before touching her, waited properly. She settled for him." Gabriel looked down. "That is not nothing," Winifred said. "It may not be enough." "Enough for what?" He had no answer. Winifred moved closer, her skirt brushing the scattered straw. "A thing can be true before it is useful to other people." Gabriel looked at her then. She picked up the strip of wool Peter had cut and smoothed it with her thumb. And a right thing does not become wrong because Silas Kemp has no patience for it. Outside, the afternoon had grown warm. The stones in the yard were drying. From far across the fields came the faint sounds of Kemp's farm preparing for the season. Boards dragged into place, sacks shaken open, men calling across the yard. The life Gabriel had believed himself made for was continuing without him. Winifred set the wool back on the bench. "You can put the shears away," she said. "No one would blame you." Gabriel looked at the tool. For a long moment he did nothing. Then he reached for the shears, not to wrap them, but to open them. The blades made their quiet, familiar sound. His left hand held the grip. His right came forward slowly and rested near the wool, weak fingers finding their small place beside the work. Winifred watched without comment. Gabriel set his feet. He breathed. He let the damaged hand feel what it could, and the left hand do what it must. The cut was slow. It was not perfect, but he made another after it. And when evening came down over Renwick, and the first lamps began to glow behind cottage windows, Gabriel was still in the shed, working alone, no longer practicing for Peter, no longer practicing for Silas, but for the quiet, stubborn part of himself that had not yet agreed to disappear. The shearing began at Kemp's farm on a morning washed clean by night rain, when the hills around Renwick rose green and silver beneath a pale sky, and the dry stone walls ran across the fields like old handwriting. By 6 o'clock, smoke had already lifted from the chimneys, boots had crossed wet yards, gates had been opened, and the first low, restless sound of gathered sheep had begun to fill the valley. Gabriel heard it from Winifred's kitchen. He was sitting at the table with a cup of tea gone nearly cold between his hands. The window was open a little, and through it came the far-off noise of the season beginning. Men calling, dogs barking, hurdles shifting, sheep pressing against one another in the holding pens. It was not loud enough to trouble anyone else. To Gabriel, it seemed to enter the room with the force of memory. Winifred moved quietly at the hearth, turning oatcakes on the iron plate. She did not ask whether he would go out. She had learned, over the years, and perhaps even before them, that some questions became harder to answer the moment they were spoken. Instead, she set breakfast before him and let the sounds from Kemp's farm do their own asking. Gabriel looked down at his right hand. It lay partly uncovered beside the cup, the fingers drawn in slightly, the skin marked where old injury and bad healing had left their evidence. In the weeks since Agatha had come, he had stopped hiding it from Winifred. That was something. A small thing, perhaps, but not nothing. He had learned to let the hand rest against wool, to feel pressure where it could, to guide rather than command. He had learned that usefulness did not always return with a trumpet. Sometimes it came back as a faint touch beneath pain. So quiet a man had to be still before he could hear it. From beyond the wall came another sound, the clean opening and closing of shears. Gabriel's shoulders tightened before he knew they had moved. Winifred saw, but only placed the oatcakes nearer his plate. "It will be a long day for them." "Yes," Gabriel said, "and a longer one if the clouds come back." He glanced toward the window. Above the eastern ridge, the light looked thin but steady. Still, the weather in the Dales had never been a thing a man could trust for long. A fine morning could fold into rain by afternoon. A clear wind could turn damp before supper. Every shearer knew the old impatience of working beneath a sky that might change its mind before the last fleece was packed. Gabriel lifted his cup and set it down again without drinking. Winifred said, "You might walk that way. I have no business there. You have eyes. That is not business. It is sometimes all a person has before he knows what else remains." Gabriel looked at her, but she had turned back to the hearth. He did not answer. He finished what little breakfast he could manage, took his coat from the peg, and stepped out into the morning before he had fully admitted to himself that he was going. The lane to Kemp's farm curved between low walls where cow parsley had begun to rise in soft white sprays and where the grass leaned wet against the stones. The air smelled of damp earth, wool, and the first warmth of the day. Overhead, rooks moved black against the pale sky, crossing toward the higher fields. Gabriel walked slowly, not because the road was difficult, but because each step carried him nearer to a place where he had once belonged, without needing permission. By the time he reached the rise above Kemp's yard, the work was already in motion. The farm lay below him in a wide sweep of noise and purpose. Sheep filled the pens in shifting grey-white clusters, their fleeces thick from the spring, their bodies pressing and turning as the dogs moved along the edges. Men carried hurdles, and dragged low benches into place. Boys ran with twine, buckets, and folded sacking. Women had set up long boards near the side of the house, where bread, cheese, cold meat, and jugs of tea waited beneath clean cloths for the noon pause. The wool sacks stood open like pale mouths, ready to be filled. Everything had its place. That was what hurt. Not chaos, not rejection shouted across a yard. The pain came from seeing how easily the old world continued when he was no longer inside it. A man might leave, be injured, return altered beyond recognition, and still the sheep would be gathered, the shears sharpened, the boards scrubbed, the fleece rolled, the day counted in work done before rain. Gabriel stood behind the wall, half hidden by a hawthorn, and watched. Silas Kemp moved through the yard with a short length of rope in one hand, speaking to men, pointing toward pens, keeping his eye on the sky. He looked tired already, though the day had hardly begun. Not weak, never that, but tight with responsibility. 600 sheep were not a number on paper once they were pressed into a yard. They were weight, weather, wool, wages, market price, and the narrow chance of doing everything at the right time. Peter was there too. Gabriel found him almost at once, though the boy was not on the shearing boards. Silas had set him to carrying fresh sacking and helping move sheep from one pen to another. Peter worked without complaint, his cap pulled low, his face serious. Now and then, when a man settled a sheep for shearing, Peter's head turned. He watched not with the eager confusion Gabriel had first seen in him, but with the quiet attention of someone looking beneath the obvious thing. A shearer near the middle board worked quickly, the blades flashing in a practiced rhythm. The fleece came away in long, pale folds. Another man joked while he worked. Knee braced, wrist quick, the sheep held firmly between his legs. A third hurried through a restless ewe, and Gabriel saw, from his place by the wall, the moment before the animal flinched. Too much pressure, too little waiting. The cut was not terrible. No one would have stopped for it. But the sheep jerked, the fleece tore at the edge, and the man muttered under his breath, as if the fault belonged entirely to the animal. Peter saw it too. Gabriel knew by the way the boy's hands paused around the sack. For one foolish second, Gabriel wanted Peter to turn and look toward the rise. He wanted the boy to know that someone else had seen what he had seen, that his slower learning had not made him stupid in the world of faster men. But Peter did not look up. He only carried the sack to the wool table and returned for another. The morning lengthened. Sheep came in heavy and went out smaller, startled by their own lightness. Fleeces were gathered, shaken, folded, and sorted. The air filled with lanolin, dust, warm animal breath, and the metallic whisper of shears. Men worked with their heads down, sleeves rolled, backs bending and straightening. The rhythm of the place was old enough to seem natural, though Gabriel knew how much training lived inside it. Every good movement had once been awkward. Every confident hand had once learned where not to press. He watched until standing became harder than walking. Then he moved along the wall and down a little way, keeping to the edge of the lane where he could see, without being asked why he had come. A few people noticed him. Mrs. Bell from the lower cottages turned her head while carrying a basket of bread. One of the younger shearers glanced up, recognized him, perhaps from stories rather than memory, and looked away again. No one called him over. That silence had a shape now. In his first days back, Gabriel had thought it was kindness. Then he had thought it was judgment. Now, watching the yard, he understood it was both and neither. People did not know where to place him. They remembered the name, not the man. They knew the injury, not the method he had been building in the quiet. To them, he was a story that had returned after its ending. The thought should have made him leave. Instead, he stayed. Near noon, the sky began to thicken in the west. A soft grey gathered beyond the high fields. Not yet rain, but a warning. Silas looked up more often. The men worked faster. The sheep in the far pen shifted and pressed against the hurdle, made impatient by waiting and the rising closeness of the air. Peter was sent to fetch water. He came up the lane with 2 pails, walking carefully so they would not spill, and only when he was nearly level with the hawthorn did he see Gabriel. He stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Peter's face changed first, surprise, then relief, then caution. He looked back toward the yard, as though his father's voice might cross the distance. Gabriel said, "You are carrying them unevenly." Peter looked down at the pails. "The left is heavier," Gabriel added. Peter shifted his grip, and the water steadied. A small smile came and went on the boy's face. "Yes, sir." Gabriel almost smiled too, but it did not quite arrive. "You are working hard, not at shearing. Work is work." Peter glanced again toward the yard. "They are fast. They have had years. I can see things now," Peter said. So quietly Gabriel might have missed it if the wind had moved. "When they hold too hard, when the sheep is about to twist, when the fleece is being pulled instead of opened." Gabriel looked at him. Peter's voice dropped further. "I thought, before, that I only could not do it because I was clumsy. But sometimes they are clumsy too, only quickly." The words entered Gabriel with a strange tenderness. He thought of all the boys who had been laughed into roughness because roughness looked more like strength. He thought of Agatha Vane standing outside the shed with her leather case, carrying a lifetime of being dismissed as careful, when careful had meant skilled in a language men had refused to learn. He thought of his own right hand, which could not grip, but could still tell him when pressure changed. "You keep watching," he said. Peter nodded. From the yard, Silas called the boy's name. Peter straightened at once. "Go," Gabriel said. Peter lifted the pails and hurried down the lane. He did not look back, but Gabriel saw that he carried them evenly now. At noon, the workers paused. Food was uncovered. Men sat on overturned crates, steps, low walls, and the edges of the boards. Their shirts clung to their backs. Their hands were marked with grease and dust. Someone laughed loudly at something Gabriel could not hear. A younger man stretched his wrist and shook out his fingers. Another rubbed his lower back. Silas stood apart for a moment, looking over the remaining sheep. There were many still to do. Too many, perhaps, if the weather turned. Gabriel knew that look. Every season had a point when the work stopped being a familiar craft and became a race against sky, fatigue, and numbers. That was when men cut corners. That was when sheep grew restless. That was when the difference between speed and haste showed itself. He wondered whether Silas knew that too. Of course he did. Silas was many things, but not ignorant. After the meal, the yard resumed with less laughter. The first ease of morning had gone. Men returned to the boards with heavier movements. The sheep resisted more often. The air had grown close. pressing the smell of wool and sweat low into the yard. Somewhere beyond the fields, thunder might have been beginning, or perhaps it was only a cart crossing a bridge. Gabriel remained until the afternoon shadows shortened and the ache in his hand became sharper. He told himself again that he did not belong there. He told himself he had only come to look. He told himself that looking was not wanting, and wanting was not proof that he had any right to return. But each time the shears opened and closed, some part of his body answered before his mind could stop it. His left hand remembered the angle. His knees remembered the shift of weight. His back remembered the bend and release. Even his ruined right hand, resting uselessly inside his sleeve, seemed to wake with a dull and stubborn knowledge. The craft had not left him cleanly. It had stayed in places injury had not known how to reach. Late in the day, Gabriel turned away from Kemp's farm and walked back toward Winifred's. Behind him, the yard continued, men calling, sheep shifting, blades closing through wool, sacks filling one fleece at a time beneath the unsettled sky. Ahead, the lane lay quiet, bordered by wet grass and stone. At the top of the rise, he paused. The sound of the shears came faintly through the distance. Open, close, open, close, like breathing, like an old song remembered by the body before the words returned. Gabriel stood there until the wind changed. Then he went home, carrying the sound with him long after Kemp's farm had disappeared behind the wall. By the middle of the shearing, the weather had begun to press upon Renwick with that quiet, uneasy heaviness which made every farmer look more often toward the sky. The morning still opened pale and fair, with dew on the wall tops and light lying softly over the dales. But by afternoon, a grey bank of cloud gathered beyond the western ridge, and the wind came down from the high moor with the damp smell of rain hidden inside it. At Kemp's farm, the work had lost the first brisk confidence of the season. The boards were still busy, the wool sacks still swelling, the women still carrying food and tea to tired men, but the rhythm had grown strained. Sheep waited longer in the pens. The dogs lay with their tongues out near the gate. The younger boys moved more carefully now, not from patience, but from weariness. Even the best shearers had begun to show the day in their shoulders. Gabriel heard most of this before he saw it. The sounds came across the fields to Winifred's yard in broken pieces, a man calling for twine, a sheep knocking hard against a hurdle, the sharp clap of a gate, the opening and closing of shears that no longer sounded quite as clean as they had on the first morning. He had tried not to listen. He had taken down a length of rope and mended it by the shed door. He had sorted the old wool again, though it needed no sorting. He had filled the water trough by the lower field, slowly, with the pail carried in his left hand and steadied awkwardly against his side. But the sounds kept coming. By noon, Winifred returned from the village with news folded into ordinary words. One of Silas's men had taken ill during the night. Not a grave illness, she said, only a fever and a shaking in the bones, but enough to keep him from the boards. Another man had strained his wrist and could only work half the pace. Silas had sent a boy to ask at 2 neighboring farms, but everyone with a good hand was already taken. Gabriel stood by the table while she spoke, his right hand resting against the edge of his coat. "He will manage," he said. Winifred looked at him. "Perhaps. Silas always manages." That is not the same as managing well. Gabriel turned toward the window. Across the fields, the sky had gone the color of unpolished pewter. He will not ask me. No, Winifred said. I do not think he will. The plainness of it settled between them. It did not accuse him. It did not excuse Silas. It only gave the truth a place to stand. For the rest of the afternoon, Gabriel remained near the shed, though there was little reason to be there. He took the shears from the bench and opened them once, then set them down again. He looked at the old practice fleece, at the strips Peter had cut weeks earlier, uneven at first and then steadier, and he remembered the boy's face when Silas had led him away. He remembered, too, the way Peter had carried the water pails more evenly after Gabriel had corrected him by the lane. A lesson did not always disappear, because someone stopped it. Late in the day, just as the first fine drops of rain began to darken the dust in the yard, Peter came through the gate. He did not run, though Gabriel could tell he wanted to. He came quickly, with his cap in one hand and his hair damp at the forehead, his breath uneven from crossing the fields. At the gate he stopped, as if remembering too late that he had been forbidden. Gabriel stood in the shed doorway. Your father sent you. Peter shook his head. Then you should not be here. I know. The rain tapped lightly on the roof behind Gabriel. It was not yet a true shower, only a warning. Beyond the low wall, the sheep in Winifred's field lifted their heads and then lowered them again. Peter swallowed. Mr. Harrow is ill. Mr. Briggs can hardly close his right hand. They are behind by nearly 70 sheep, maybe more. Father says if the rain comes hard before tomorrow evening, the rest will have to wait, and some of the fleeces are already too heavy. Gabriel listened without moving. Peter went on, more quietly now. There is one ewe in the side pen. Old Molly. She is quiet. Thick fleece, but she stands better than most. I thought... He stopped. Gabriel's damaged hand tightened inside his sleeve. You thought what? I thought if you wanted to try, it could be her. The words were small, and because they were small, they reached him more deeply than any great appeal could have done. Peter had not come asking for the old Gabriel Thorne, the man who had once taken pride in numbers, speed, and the astonished looks of other men. He had not come begging for a miracle or a show. He had brought the name of one sheep, one quiet ewe, one possible beginning. Gabriel looked past him toward the darkening fields. Your father will not allow it. He may not stop you if you are already there. That is a boy's way of thinking. Peter's face flushed. Perhaps. And if I fail? Peter did not answer at once. That silence was better than comfort. It meant he understood the question. At last he said, Then you will have tried one sheep. Gabriel looked at him sharply, but there was no challenge in Peter's face, only trust, and something steadier than trust, the memory of having watched a man continue after shame. Rain touched the stones between them. Gabriel turned back into the shed. For a moment, Peter seemed to think he had refused. Then Gabriel reached for the shears. They lay on the bench where he had left them, cleaned and wrapped in cloth, no longer hidden away as an old sorrow. He unfolded them slowly. The blades caught what little light remained. His left hand found the grip. His right hand, stiff and reluctant, came forward to rest against the metal, not holding, not commanding, but present. Winifred appeared at the kitchen door. She had heard enough to understand. Gabriel did not look at her when he said, It may be foolish. It may be, she answered. That almost made him smile. She crossed the yard and helped him into his coat without fussing, careful around the bad hand, as she had learned to be, without making a ceremony of it. Then she took his old cap from the peg and held it out. Peter stepped aside as Gabriel came out of the shed. The walk to Kemp's farm felt longer than it had before. The fields were dim under the cloud, the walls darkening with rain, the grass silver where the wind turned it. Peter kept a little ahead, then slowed, remembering not to hurry. Gabriel noticed this and said nothing. The boy was learning even now. As they neared the yard, the noise grew clearer. Men were tired. Sheep were restless. Someone cursed when a fleece tore. Someone else laughed too loudly, with the sharp edge of exhaustion beneath it. Silas's voice cut through the air, giving orders, counting, correcting, refusing to let worry show as worry. Then Peter and Gabriel stepped through the gate. The yard changed before anyone spoke. A few heads turned first, then more. The nearest shearer paused, with his blades half open. One of the women at the food table lowered the cloth she had been folding. Silas, standing beside the main pen, looked up and saw his son, then saw Gabriel behind him. His face hardened. Peter stopped beside the side pen. "Father," Silas did not look at him. His eyes stayed on Gabriel. "This is not a place for visiting." Gabriel felt every gaze in the yard settle on his coat sleeve, on the hand beneath it, on the shears held in his left hand. For one terrible moment, the old fear rose so strongly that he nearly turned back. He saw himself, as they might see him, a damaged man, a remembered name, a poor imitation of what had once been useful. Then old Molly shifted in the side pen. She was a broad, patient ewe, with a fleece thick enough to hang in soft, heavy folds along her sides. She stood apart from the others, not calm exactly, but less troubled than most. Peter had chosen well. Gabriel looked at the sheep, not at the people. "I will try one," he said. Silas's jaw tightened. "This is not a charity board." "No," Gabriel said. "It is shearing." The words were quiet, but they carried. For a moment, Silas seemed ready to refuse. Perhaps, on another day, he would have. But behind him, the sky deepened. In the pens, the waiting sheep pressed and turned. One man coughed hard into his sleeve. Another flexed his sore wrist and looked away, ashamed of needing rest. Silas glanced at Peter, then at the ewe, then at Gabriel's shears. "One," he said at last. No one moved. Gabriel stepped toward the pen, and with every step he felt the whole yard watching. He was not afraid of the sheep. He had known sheep all his life. Their weight, their warmth, their sudden fear, their stubborn trust when held rightly. What he feared was the first cut, the proof, the moment when memory met the ruined body and either became work again or failed in front of everyone. Peter opened the pen gate. Gabriel entered slowly. He did not reach at once. He stood near old Molly and let her see him. He let his breathing settle. He remembered his own lesson. Do not hurry toward a frightened thing, not even when the frightened thing is yourself. The ewe shifted, then stilled. Gabriel bent his knees. His right hand ached before he touched her. His left hand closed around the shears. His body, older and altered, arranged itself around the old knowledge in a new way. Shoulder, back, hip, breath, weight. Not the old speed, not the old pride, something quieter. Peter stood at the gate, hardly breathing. Silas watched from the yard, and Gabriel, with the first sheep before him and the rain beginning softly on the roof boards, lowered the blades toward the wool. Gabriel stood with old Molly before him, while the whole yard seemed to hold its breath. The rain had not yet become heavy, but it had begun to make a soft ticking sound on the edge of the shed roof, and that small sound, steady and patient, was almost the only thing he could hear. The men who had been talking a moment earlier had fallen quiet. The boys by the wool sacks stopped shifting from one foot to the other. Even the dogs near the gate seemed to lower their heads and wait. Gabriel did not look at any of them. He looked only at the ewe. Old Molly was warm beneath his hands, broad in the body, with the kind of thick spring fleece that could either come away cleanly or fight every inch if a man pulled against it. Gabriel could feel the weight of her, not only in his arms but through his knees, his back, his left shoulder, all the places where he had been teaching himself to listen. Once, long ago, he would have settled her in a single practiced movement, quick enough to draw a murmur from anyone watching. He would have let the old strength carry him. He would have trusted the right hand without thinking of it at all. Now he moved slowly. He let the ewe shift once, then waited. He adjusted his stance. He felt his own breath come too shallow and made it lengthen. His left hand held the shears. His right hand, stiff and uncertain, rested lightly against the wool, not gripping, not forcing, only sensing where the skin lay beneath the fleece. It was not the hand he remembered. It could not close as it once had. It could not bear strain. But as it touched the warm wool, Gabriel felt something through it, faint but real. Pressure, nearness, the small warning of movement before movement came. Agatha had been right. A hand did not need to command in order to know. He opened the shears. The sound was small, but to Gabriel it seemed enormous. The first cut waited before him, like a question no one else could answer. He could feel Silas watching. He could feel Peter watching more fiercely still. He could feel the old stories of himself standing behind him. All those remembered numbers, all those men who had once clapped him on the shoulder and said there was no quicker hand in the dales. For a moment, shame rose in him so strongly that his left fingers tightened too hard around the handle. Old Molly stirred. Gabriel stopped. He did not cut. He loosened his grip, let the blades rest closed, and waited until the ewe settled again. Somewhere behind him, a man shifted his boots in the straw. Someone gave a small breath, almost impatient. Gabriel heard it and let it pass. Then he began. The first line of wool opened slowly beneath the blades. It was not beautiful in the old way. It did not flash. It did not sweep. The shears moved with care, a little uncertain at the start, then steadier as Gabriel found the angle. His left hand worked the blades. His right hand touched and guided. His shoulder followed through where the wrist could not. His knees took the change of weight before the ewe had reason to struggle. The fleece parted. No blood showed. Old Molly did not start. Gabriel breathed out. He had not known he had been holding that breath until it left him. He made the second cut with less fear. Still slow, still plain, but cleaner. The wool lifted in a soft pale fold, and Gabriel moved with it, not pulling, only opening a path. His body began to remember in pieces the turn of the knee, the lean of the hip, the way to hold an animal without making a battle of it, the quiet moment before a sheep would kick, the difference between wool that was ready to fall and wool that had to be coaxed. There was pain in his right hand. Of course there was. It came like a coal buried under the skin, brightening each time he asked the hand to steady itself. But it did not own him. It was only one voice among others now. There was the pressure of the ewe, the balance of his feet, the damp smell of lanolin, the whisper of blades, the listening silence of the yard. Gabriel cut on. The fleece began to loosen in a larger sheet. It slid away from old Molly's side in soft, heavy folds, holding together better than he had dared hope. A younger shearer near the boards leaned forward despite himself. One of the women by the table pressed her hands into her apron. Peter stood near the gate, his face pale with concentration, as though he were helping to hold every breath in place. Silas said nothing. That silence was almost harder than speech. Gabriel came to the part where, in his old days, he would have turned the sheep with speed and confidence. He paused. The old movement was there in his memory, exact and useless. If he tried it that way, he would fail. He knew it as surely as he knew the smell of rain. So he did not try to be the man he had been. He shifted more slowly, using his left knee, then his hip, then the weight of his own body to guide old Molly into the next position. The ewe resisted for one brief second. Gabriel felt it through the ruined hand before the motion had fully begun. He stopped, eased the pressure, waited, then moved again. This time she followed. A small murmur passed through the yard. Gabriel did not lift his head. The next cuts came with a steadier rhythm. Open, close, breathe, shift, wait, open, close. Not fast enough for old pride. Not fast enough for a man trying to prove he had never been broken. But clean enough for the sheep. Clean enough for the fleece. Clean enough for the truth. By the time he reached the final fold, the rain had strengthened a little, blurring the far edge of the yard and darkening the backs of the sheep in the outer pen. No one moved to hurry him. Perhaps they had forgotten to. Perhaps they understood, without yet knowing how to say it, that they were not watching a contest of speed. They were watching a man find a way to return without pretending the road had been easy. The last strip of wool came free. It fell beside him, almost whole. Gabriel remained still for a moment, one hand resting lightly on old Molly's bare, warm side. The ewe blinked, surprised by her own lightness, then stood calm beneath his touch. There was no cut on her skin, no torn patch where the fleece had been dragged, no panic in her body, only the clean, slightly awkward quiet after a careful piece of work had been finished. Peter moved first. He stepped forward, then stopped himself, as if he knew any loud joy would break something fragile. Gabriel let old Molly go. She moved away into the pen, smaller now, almost shy without her fleece. He bent slowly and lifted the wool from the straw. The weight of it pulled at his left arm. His right hand could only help a little, but it helped. Together, in their uneven way, his hands carried the fleece to the sorting board. No one cheered. A cheer would have belonged to the old Gabriel, the quick one, the young one, the man who could turn admiration into armor. This was quieter than that. The men looked at the fleece. They looked at the sheep. They looked at Gabriel's hands, and then, one by one, away again, as if embarrassed by what they had failed to understand. Silas came forward. He did not hurry. He examined old Molly first, running his hand along her side, checking where the blades had passed. Then he turned to the fleece on the board. He lifted one edge, looked at the length, the cleanliness, the unbroken spread of it. His face gave very little away. At last he said, "That is a clean shearing, only that. No apology, no praise dressed warmly, no admission that he had been wrong." But Gabriel heard what was inside the words. He heard the space they made for him. He heard the gate opening, not wide, not grandly, but enough. Peter looked at him then, and in the boy's eyes, Gabriel saw no pity at all. That was the greater mercy. Gabriel set the shears down on the board. His hand was shaking now that the work was over. The pain had sharpened, and his back ached, and sweat had cooled beneath his shirt. He was not restored. He was not young. He was not what the village remembered. But he had shorn one sheep, one quiet ewe, in rain, before the whole yard. And the fleece lay clean. Silas did not ask Gabriel to stay in front of everyone. For a while, he only stood beside the sorting board, looking at the fleece that had come from old Molly, as if it were a thing he had not expected to find in his own yard. The rain had softened to a thin mist again, and beyond the open doors, the hills were dim, the stone walls dark with damp. The waiting sheep, shifting in their pens, with the weary patience of creatures who knew nothing of pride, injury, or the long silence between men. Gabriel thought, at first, that the moment was finished. He had done what Peter had asked. He had shorn one sheep. The fleece lay clean. The ewe was uncut. That was enough to carry home, enough to sit with in Winifred's kitchen when the evening came down over the fields. He reached for the cloth beside the board, meaning to wipe the shears, wrap them, and leave before the yard remembered how strange it was to see him there. Then Silas spoke. "There are 3 lads here who cannot keep a sheep still for more than half a minute," he said. No one answered. Silas kept his eyes on the fleece, and Briggs cannot use that wrist for much longer. Gabriel looked at him. The older farmer's face remained hard, but there was something tired behind the hardness now, something not quite apology and not quite surrender. Silas was a man who could command a field, count a flock, judge weather by the ache in his bones, and yet could not easily step across the small distance between being wrong and saying so. He cleared his throat, then looked toward the younger men gathered near the sideboard. "If you have something to show them," Silas said, "show them." It was not a soft invitation. It was not gracious, but it was an opening. Gabriel felt Peter looking at him, bright, with a hope the boy tried very hard to hide. He felt, too, the attention of the other men, some curious, some doubtful, some still embarrassed by the quiet success of old Molly's fleece. For a moment, the old instinct rose in him, the instinct to refuse before he could be refused again, to protect what little dignity he had gathered by carrying it away untouched. But the sheep were waiting, and Peter was waiting. So Gabriel picked up the shears again. He did not begin with a speech. The old teams had always been full of loud advice, half-teasing rebukes, and quick judgments thrown across the boards. Gabriel had once been part of that noise. He had once believed that a good shearer proved himself by speed first and silence later, when the number of finished sheep had already made his argument for him. But now words felt heavier, and he chose them with more care. He asked one of the younger lads, Tom Arkwright, to bring forward a small ewe from the second pen. Tom was broad-shouldered and eager, with good arms and poor patience. Gabriel had watched him earlier from the lane, forcing the sheep into position too quickly, then fighting its fear as though the struggle were the animal's fault. "Do not take hold yet," Gabriel said. Tom stopped with one hand on the hurdle. Gabriel stood beside him. "Look at her first." The lad frowned. "At what?" "At where she carries the weight, at which way she wants to turn, at the foot she favors, at the breath." One of the older men gave a quiet snort, not quite mocking, not quite amused. Gabriel heard it and let it pass. Tom looked uncomfortable, but he obeyed. He stood by the pen and watched the ewe. At first his eyes moved impatiently, seeing only wool, body, work waiting to be done. Then, slowly, he saw what Gabriel meant. The ewe leaned slightly away from the gate. Her left hind leg shifted before the rest of her. Her breathing was quick, but not panicked. "She'll pull right," Tom said at last. Gabriel nodded. "Then do not meet her with your right as if it is a wall. Give her somewhere to settle." Tom's face changed a little, not because he understood everything, but because he had understood one thing. Sometimes one thing was enough to begin. They brought the ewe out together. Gabriel did not take over. He placed Tom's feet more carefully, moved his elbow lower, showed him how to hold without clamping, how to use the side of the body rather than the fist alone. When Tom's grip tightened, the ewe stiffened. When he eased, she eased. The lesson appeared in the animal before it appeared in the boy. "There," Gabriel said quietly. "She told you." Tom looked down, surprised. "I felt it." "I feel it sooner next time." The yard listened. It happened gradually, almost against the will of those who had doubted. One man stepped closer, then another. A boy carrying twine forgot the twine in his hand. Briggs, with his sore wrist wrapped in cloth, came near enough to watch the way Gabriel placed the blade against the fleece. Gabriel showed them how a slower first cut could save time later, because the sheep did not spend the next 5 minutes fighting. He showed how to turn with the knees instead of dragging with the hands. He showed where the skin lay loose and where a careless blade would mark it. He showed when to stop. That last lesson was the hardest for them. Men who worked by the count did not like stopping. They liked to push through awkwardness, through fatigue, through the small warnings of pain and fear. Gabriel had done the same for most of his life. Now he knew the cost of ignoring a warning until the body made its own refusal. "When the sheep tells you to wait," he said, "wait." One of the men muttered, "Rain will not wait." "No," Gabriel said, "but a torn fleece takes time. A cut sheep takes more. And a frightened animal teaches the next one to fear the board before you touch it." That silenced them better than any scolding could have done. By late afternoon, Gabriel was no longer standing apart from the work. He moved from board to board, not fast, never with the old flashing certainty, but with a steadiness that made room around him. He corrected a shoulder here, a grip there. He took the shears only when needed, showing one clean line and then handing them back. His right hand ached badly, and twice he had to tuck it against his coat until the pain settled. But no one looked away in discomfort now. They had seen it help. They had seen that even altered, even weak, it still knew something. Peter worked near the side pen under Gabriel's eye. He did not yet shear like a man. He was still slow, still too careful in places. still likely to glance toward his father after every mistake. But he no longer moved like a boy trying to imitate strength. He moved like someone listening. When a ewe shifted, he breathed before he pulled. When the fleece snagged, he stopped before it tore. Gabriel saw Silas notice. The father said nothing, but his silence had changed shape. Near the end of the day, when the clouds broke slightly and a pale wash of evening light spread over the wet yard, Agatha Vane arrived, with a basket over one arm and her old shears wrapped in a shawl. She had heard, somehow, as news always found its way through Renwick before the road was dry. She came through the gate without hurry, nodded once to Silas, then looked at Gabriel with the faintest lift at the corner of her mouth.
"So," she said, "they have discovered sheep are not clocks."
Gabriel almost laughed. Silas shifted, uncomfortable, but he did not send her away. That, too, was a kind of answer. Agatha set down her basket, unwrapped her shears, and asked for the smallest yearling in the far pen. Some of the younger men looked at her with the old doubt, the old habit of seeing a woman's skill as curiosity before knowledge. But Gabriel stepped aside at once and gave her the board. She worked slowly, not weakly, not timidly, slowly, with the clean economy of someone who had spent a lifetime making carefulness survive in rooms that preferred force. Her hands knew small tricks Gabriel had forgotten, and others he had never learned. How to ease a nervous lamb by covering the eye for a breath. How to loosen a matted patch without spoiling the line. How to rest the animal's weight so neither shearer nor sheep carried too much strain. The yard watched her. This time, no one laughed. When she finished, the fleece lay narrow and clean. The yearling stood unhurt, and Tom Arkwright said, under his breath, "I never saw it done like that." Agatha wiped her blades. "That does not mean it was not being done." The words settled quietly, but they reached more than one man. After that, the work changed. Not entirely. Not like a sermon turning hearts in a single afternoon. The old shearers still moved quickly. Silas still counted the sheep. The weather still pressed at the edges of the day. But something had loosened. The younger ones began asking questions without shame. Briggs learned how to rest his wrist and still help with positioning. Peter was allowed to return to the board after tea. Agatha stayed, first for one sheep, then another, until even Silas asked her where she had learned a particular turn. "By being told I was too slow," she answered. Silas gave a short sound that might almost have been a laugh if it had known how. As evening came on, the yard smelled of wet wool, straw, tea, and tired bodies. The great sacks stood fuller now. The restless pressure in the pens had eased. Sheep moved out into the lower field lighter and pale against the green, while the last of the mist lifted from the walls. No one called Gabriel a hero. No one spoke of Bradford. No one asked to see his hand. They only made room for him at the board. For Gabriel, that was stranger and kinder than praise. When the day's work was finally called to a stop, Silas came to stand beside him. For a long moment, the two men watched Peter helping Tom fold a fleece, the boy's face serious with the importance of doing it properly. "You have taught him steadiness," Silas said. Gabriel looked across the yard. He already had it. He only needed someone to stop hurrying him past it. Silas took that in. His jaw moved once, as if a harder answer had come and gone. Then he said, "Come again tomorrow." Gabriel felt the ache in his hand, the deep pull across his shoulders, the old fear still present, but no longer ruling the whole of him. "If I am of use," he said. Silas looked toward the clean fleeces stacked under cover. "You are." It was still not an apology, but it was enough for the morning. When the shearing season ended, it did not end with a cheer, or a feast large enough for remembering, or any grand speech made in Gabriel Thorne's name. It ended on a mild evening after rain, when the last pale sheep had been let through the lower gate, and the final fleece had been folded, tied, and carried into the shed with the others. The yard at Kemp's farm, which for many days had been full of calling voices, shifting hooves, open shears, damp wool, and the steady pressure of work that must be finished before the weather changed, became slowly quiet again. The silence felt almost unfamiliar. Gabriel stood near the boards while the younger men swept straw into damp piles, and the boys gathered loose tags of wool from the corners. His back ached. His left hand was stiff from holding the shears. His right hand throbbed with that deep, weather-bound pain which had become part of him now, like an old clock in another room, sometimes quiet, sometimes louder than he wished. He flexed the fingers as much as they would allow, then let them rest against his coat. He had not become what he once was. That truth stood plainly before him, and for the first time since his return to Renwick, it did not feel like a sentence. He had not shorn 200 sheep in a day. He had not amazed the young men with speed. He had not made the older men shake their heads and say that Gabriel Thorne's hands had lost nothing in 25 years. His right hand had not healed into the hand of his youth. It had not forgiven the machine at Bradford. It had not become strong because he had found courage. It was still weak. It still failed him in small ways. It still made him pause before lifting a pail, before buttoning his cuff, before reaching too quickly for anything that might ask more of it than it could give. But it had helped. It had rested against warm wool and felt the first warning of movement. It had steadied where it could. It had taught him to wait. It had reminded him that a thing altered was not always a thing ended. Across the yard, Peter Kemp was helping Tom Arkwright carry a fleece toward the weighing place. The boy no longer moved with that sharp, anxious haste Gabriel had noticed at the beginning of spring. He still made mistakes, and likely would make many more, but there was a new quietness in him now. He looked before he acted. He let the sheep settle. He had learned that strength was not always the first answer, and that a hand could do better work when it listened before it commanded. Silas watched his son from beside the gate. For several moments, he said nothing. That had become his way with Gabriel. Fewer words, but better placed. At last he stepped closer, his boots dark with mud, his sleeves rolled down, now that the day's work was done. "The lads will want more practice before next year," he said. Gabriel looked at him, uncertain whether he had heard an invitation or only an observation. Silas kept his eyes on the yard, Peter especially. The name was offered plainly, but it carried more than the sentence seemed to hold. Gabriel understood that Silas was not a man who could easily say he had been afraid for his son, or ashamed of having judged too quickly, or grateful for what had been given back to the farm in a form he had not expected. Those meanings had to come through other doors. Gabriel nodded. "He has the makings." Silas gave a short breath. "He has more patience than I gave him credit for." "That is often true of boys," Gabriel said, "and men." Silas glanced at him then, and for one brief second, Something almost like apology passed between them. It did not need naming. In Renwick, some things were better accepted in silence, so long as the silence was honest. The next morning, Gabriel expected the village to return to its usual ways. The shearing was done. The urgency had passed. Men who had needed advice during long wet days would go back to mending walls, moving stock, sharpening tools, and speaking of him, perhaps kindly, as a useful man in a difficult week. But after breakfast, while Winifred was setting a pan of bread near the window to cool, there came a knock at the door. Peter stood outside with his cap in both hands. Behind him were Tom Arkwright, little Matthew Bell from the far lane, and another boy Gabriel recognized only by face, a narrow-shouldered child with solemn eyes and boots too large for him. They stood in a crooked line beside the path, trying very hard to appear as if they had arrived by accident. Winifred looked from them to Gabriel, then lifted one eyebrow in a way that said she had expected this before he had. Peter cleared his throat. "Mr. Thorne," he said, and then stopped, because calling him that seemed too formal now, but calling him Gabriel still seemed too bold. Gabriel waited. Peter tried again. "We wondered if you might show us the turn again. The one for a sheep that pulls right," Tom added quickly, "and how to begin without spoiling the fleece." Matthew Bell, who could not have been more than 12, said, "And how to hold the shears if your fingers are short." The last boy said nothing at all, but his face was full of wanting. Gabriel looked at them for a long moment. Once, he would have heard such a request as proof that he had something worth admiring. Now he heard something quieter and better. They had not come to see the fastest shearer in the Dales. They had come because they had seen another kind of knowledge, and they wanted to learn before someone told them they must hurry past it. Winifred wiped her hands on her apron. "The shed is dry," she said. So Gabriel took down the old shears and led the boys around the side of the house, past the low stone wall, past the patch of nettles growing where the rain barrel leaked, and into the small shed that had once felt to him like a room full of accusations. It did not feel that way now. The light came through the gaps in the boards in pale lines. Dust moved slowly in the air. The old hooks, ropes, sacks, and tools lay in their places, no longer ghosts of what he had lost, but witnesses to what remained. Gabriel set the shears on the bench and asked the boys to stand still. They looked confused. Peter almost smiled, because he knew what was coming. "The first lesson," Gabriel said, "is not cutting." Tom sighed, but softly, without rebellion. Gabriel showed them how to look at a sheep before touching it. He showed them how to notice weight, breath, fear, tiredness, trust. He showed them how a man's body could become gentler without becoming weak. He placed Peter's hand on the wooden practice frame and corrected his wrist. He made Matthew change his stance 3 times before allowing him to lift the shears. He told Tom that eagerness was useful only after it had learned manners. The boys listened. Not perfectly. Boys rarely listen perfectly, but they listened enough. In the days that followed, more came. Sometimes only Peter, sometimes 2 or 3 at once. Once, Agatha Vane arrived without warning, carrying her own shears wrapped in the same shawl, and took over the lesson for an hour, while Gabriel stood aside and watched the boys learn from her with the seriousness she had deserved many years earlier. She did not soften her corrections. She told Tom his hands were clumsy because his thoughts were clumsy. She told Matthew that short fingers were no excuse for poor attention. She told Peter that a quiet boy must still learn to speak clearly to an animal, because hesitation could frighten as much as force. The boys adored her. They were terrified of her too, which Gabriel thought was sensible. By early June, the shed behind Winifred's house had become a small school no one had planned. There were no benches, no slate board, no printed lessons, only a few old fleeces, a wooden frame, 2 pairs of shears, and the patient repetition of things that could not be learned in haste. Some evenings, men stopped by on their way home and leaned against the doorframe, pretending they had only come to ask after the weather. Briggs came twice to learn how to work without angering his injured wrist. Even Silas came once, stood outside for 10 minutes, said nothing, and left a bundle of clean practice wool on the bench. Gabriel understood. The village had not changed completely. No village ever did. There were still men who valued numbers above all else, still boys who wanted to be praised for speed, still old habits that would return the moment pressure rose. But a new thought had entered Renwick, and once a thought had entered a place, it was difficult to drive it out again. There was more than one way to be useful. There was more than one way to be strong. There was more than one way for a hand to remember its work. One evening, after the boys had gone and the last gold light of the day lay across the floorboards, Gabriel remained alone in the shed. The air smelled faintly of lanolin, dust, and cooling earth. Beyond the open door, the fields after shearing looked strangely tender, the sheep pale and light against the deepening green. The dry stone walls ran over the slopes like lines of thought that had been placed there by patient hands long before him. On the bench lay the old shears he had brought back from his youth. For years, he had thought of them as proof of another life. Then, after the accident, as proof of an ending. He had hated their brightness. He had hated the ease with which they remembered what his body could not. He had nearly hidden them away more than once, as if a tool could shame a man simply by remaining whole. Now he lifted them carefully. The weight was familiar, not cruel, familiar. His right hand could not hold them as it once had, so his left hand took most of the burden. The right rested near the handle, light and imperfect, but present. Gabriel stood that way for a while, feeling both the loss and the strange peace beside it. He did not need to pretend one erased the other. Then he took a length of cord from the shelf and hung the shears on the wall above the workbench, not high, as if they were a relic, not hidden, as if they were a wound, only there, where the boys could see them when they came, and where he could see them too. Winifred found him a few minutes later. She stood in the doorway with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, a little flower still dusting one wrist. "You have made a chapel of the shed," she said. Gabriel looked at the shears, then at the practice wool on the bench, then at the marks the boys' boots had left in the dust. "No," he said quietly. "A school, perhaps." Winifred smiled, but not too much. She was kind enough not to make the moment larger than he could bear. "They will come again tomorrow," she said. "I know. And the day after." Gabriel nodded. Outside, the evening wind moved over the fields, passing through the grass with a sound like something being gently brushed clean. The village lay beyond the wall, small and weathered and imperfect, holding its old judgments and its new mercies side by side. Somewhere down the lane, Peter Kemp was likely practicing the turn with a broom handle while Silas pretended not to notice. Somewhere in her cottage, Agatha Vane was sharpening her shears with the satisfaction of a woman whose knowledge had finally found ears willing to hear it. Gabriel stood beneath the hanging shears and felt the ache in his right hand settle into something quieter. He was not the fastest shearer in the Dales. He would never be that man again. But when the boys came to the shed, they came carefully. When they touched the shears, they touched them with respect. When they spoke of sheep, they spoke less of beating time and more of keeping the fleece clean, the animal calm, the body steady, the hand honest. And so, little by little, without announcement, the village began to give Gabriel a different name. Not the quickest, not the strongest, the wisest shearer in the Dales. The name did not make him proud in the old way. It did not lift his chin or sharpen his voice. It settled around him softly, like a coat that had once belonged to someone else, but had been altered until it fit. He wore it with humility and some surprise, and a gratitude too deep for easy speech. That night, after Winifred had gone inside, and the first coolness came down from the hills, Gabriel closed the shed door, but did not lock it. He stood for a moment in the yard, listening to the small sounds of Renwick after work, a gate latch, a distant ewe, the low murmur of someone calling a child home. The wind moved over the shorn fields. The grass leaned and rose again, and Gabriel, standing there with one strong hand and one damaged hand, no longer felt himself to be only the shadow of the man who had left Renwick long ago. He had returned altered. He had returned slowly. He had returned. As our story comes gently to an end, let yourself remain here for a little while longer, quiet and comfortable. There is nothing you need to think about now, and nothing you need to hold on to. Let the day fade softly behind you, like a lamp being lowered in a distant room. Allow your breathing to become slow and easy. Let your shoulders rest. Let your hands grow still. If any thoughts pass through your mind, you do not need to follow them. Simply let them drift away, softly and quietly. The world can wait until morning. For now, just rest, breathe slowly, let go, and sleep.